Welcome back to Dreamland Encounters, where I share real-life stories of extraordinary experiences from beyond our skies. Before we begin, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from. Get comfortable, settle in, and let's dive into tonight's story. Flying has been my life for years. I know every inch of my little Cessna 172 and have logged countless flights over the Kansas landscape. But one late September evening, something happened that would change everything. I was cruising at about 500 feet just outside Wichita, with the sun recently dipped below the horizon. That in-between twilight cast a soft glow over the farmland and cornfields stretching beneath me. Everything seemed routine, until it wasn't. A flash of metallic brightness caught my eye. At first, I thought it might be another aircraft or a drone, but as I looked closer, something felt different. The object wasn't like anything I'd seen before, almost disc-like, but more angular, like a flattened diamond with smooth edges. No blinking lights, no sound, just this solid reflective shape hanging impossibly in the sky. Then it moved, not a gentle drift or a standard hover, but a razor-sharp 90-degree turn without any visible acceleration. As a pilot, I know physics. Something that size shouldn't be able to maneuver like that without tearing itself apart. Yet somehow it did. For a few seconds, I was frozen. Then instinct kicked in. I adjusted my heading, determined to track this strange object. But when I crested the tree ridge, it had vanished. No trail, no noise, just empty sky. My instruments showed nothing unusual. The radio was silent. My heart was racing as I tried to process what I'd just witnessed. Had I really seen what I thought I saw? I touched down at my home airstrip with shaking hands, knowing this flight was anything but ordinary. No. After shutting down the engine at 8, I was about to exit when two men appeared beside my truck. Their black uniforms resembled those of military or government agents, but no badges or insignia were visible. They stood serious and silent as I climbed down. I tried breaking the silence first. "Can I help you?" One man stepped forward and asked without introduction, "Do you believe in physics or just experience?" Confused, I responded, "What do you mean?" Instead of answering, the other man pulled out a small black box with a screen and buttons. I glanced nervously at the runway, then back at them. Something about their calm demeanor made me uneasy. "I saw something strange up here," I said quietly. "The metallic object that moved in a way that didn't make sense." The man with the device looked up and nodded. "We know," he said. Then the first man asked, "Did it seem aware of you watching?" I hesitated, unsure if I was just projecting fear. "I don't know. It didn't make a sound or blink lights, but the way it turned felt deliberate." They exchanged a meaningful glance. The second man spoke, "Things like that don't just happen by accident. You've seen something you shouldn't have." I wanted to ask what they meant, but the words stuck in my throat. "Who are you?" I managed to ask. They didn't respond. "You'll hear from us again. Until then, keep your experience to yourself," the first man stated coldly. Just like that, they walked away and drove off in a black SUV with no license plates. I watched the dust settle behind their tires, my mind racing. Over the next few days, nothing happened. I told only Lisa about the encounter, leaving out most details. The story sounded crazy when spoken aloud, but the strange part didn't end there. Every time I flew over that same patch of farmland, I felt watched. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of something reflective at the tree line, but it always vanished when I tried to get closer. On a late flight home, my radio started crackling with static bursts on a clear frequency. No words, just a low, buzzing noise that lasted about 30 seconds before cutting out completely. No, I was out in the field late September, working on a project about nocturnal animal behavior in the forests near Ashland, Oregon. As a wildlife biologist, my focus that season was tracking owl and bat movements. I'd set up a small trailer on the edge of a clearing where we tagged some animals, and I spent most nights here watching and recording. One night around 11 p.m., I stepped outside the trailer to check some motion sensors near the tree line. It was a cool night, the kind that smells like pine needles and damp earth. The air was still, with no wind and no rustling in the leaves, except for the usual night sounds. As I scanned the treetops with a flashlight, I noticed something odd. A faint glow hung above the trees about 100 feet up. At first, I thought it was a drone or a small helicopter, but there was no sound, no buzz, no rotor noise, nothing. Just this quiet, steady light. It wasn't moving like a drone would either. It hovered in place just over the tree canopy, and the light was diffuse, kind of a pale white with a slight bluish tint. I stared for a minute, trying to convince myself it was some kind of aircraft I didn't recognize. But everything about it felt wrong. The silence was what got me. In all my years around wildlife and occasional low-flying planes, there's always noise. I pulled out my phone and tried to take a picture, but the camera wouldn't focus properly. The light kind of seemed to interfere with the technology. Separately, something strange happened during my flying. My instruments were all fine, but my handheld GPS kept losing signal for a few seconds in the exact same area every time. I checked the plane over and over, no signs of damage or interference. Lisa started noticing it, too. She said that when I came home from flying, I looked tense, like I was carrying something invisible. A couple weeks later, I ran into Mr. Bearcapel, Jenkins, an old pilot who used to fly crop dusters in the area. I told him about the object and the men in black, expecting a laugh or a shake of the head. Instead, he just nodded and said, "You're not the first. Folks have seen strange things around here for years, but no one talks about it." That made me feel a little better, like I wasn't losing it. I kept flying, but I stayed away from that airspace as much as possible. The men never contacted me again. He and I didn't see them anywhere. But sometimes when I'm up here alone and the sun is setting just right, I catch that same gleam, that impossible turn in the corner of my eye, and I wonder what they're really watching, and if they're still watching me. During my research, I kept encountering strange occurrences. At first, it was just a light that seemed blurry on my screen, almost like interference. Then suddenly, I vanished. One moment I was there, the next I wasn't. I checked all my setup, motion sensors and cameras, hoping to catch something. But the footage revealed nothing unusual. The forest looked completely normal, with owl calls and bat movements, precisely as they always were. Those nights passed without any further incidents. About a week later, 2 men arrived at my research trailer just after sunset. I was in the middle of organizing samples when an unexpected knock came. Opening the door, I found 2 men in dark suits and black coats. They weren't typical official personnel, no badges or standard uniforms. Instead, they wore laminated ID cards hanging from chains. When I asked who they were, their names meant nothing to me. They introduced themselves as Agent Blake and Agent Crane, claiming to represent a federal wildlife compliance office I'd never heard of. Their questions focused on local animal migration and recent anomalies. I hesitated, thinking about the strange light I'd witnessed. Choosing caution, I responded vaguely that nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. The owls and bats seemed to follow their regular patterns. Agent Crane nodded, looking unconvinced. Blake commented about reviewing my recent reports, suggesting they wanted to help get the records in order. They requested to examine my notes and raw data files. Though uneasy, I agreed. After an hour, they departed, leaving a sealed folder labeled "Corrected Data" on my desk. Inside, I discovered what appeared to be my reports, but with subtly altered numbers and observations. Movement patterns looked more consistent, with certain details mysteriously omitted. Attempting to verify their agency, I found the phone numbers non-functional. No one seemed to know anything about these men or their office. In the following days, strange developments continued. The animals I'd been tracking began behaving unusually. One morning, I discovered a dozen bird carcasses beneath a roost, a disturbing development that added to the growing sense of unease. I needed to clear my head, get away from the city noise and deadlines. I'm Mark Reynolds, 35, and I live in Portland, but I spend a lot of time exploring the more remote parts of Oregon whenever I can. This time, I chose a trail near an old Cold War radar station up by the Cascades. Not exactly a tourist spot, mostly forgotten, except by the locals and a few hikers like me. It was late October and the weather had turned cold and damp. The first evening I got there, I set up camp just past the tree line, not far from where the radar installation used. To operate, most of the concrete and metal was gone, just ruins left behind. But you could still see the foundation slabs and a few rusted antenna pieces sticking up. I was settling in around 7 p.m. when this low, deep hum started. It wasn't like any engine or animal I knew, it was constant, like a sound vibrating through the ground and air at the same time. With no visible injuries, just dead. The bats stopped coming out altogether. I tried to report it, but the local wildlife center said there hadn't been any similar reports. Sometimes when I walked near the tree line at night, I'd catch glimpses of shadows moving just out of sight, but nothing concrete. I couldn't tell if it was animals or something else. One night I heard a low hum like a distant engine, but when I looked up, the sky was clear, no planes or helicopters. My phone started glitching with static sounds on calls and strange interference on my camera. Then my laptop died, just completely bricked itself the day after the men came. I tried to get back to my work, but every time I felt I was getting close to something important, there was interference. Data would disappear. Notes I'd made would vanish from files. The men never came back, but I kept finding traces of them, like that folder, or hearing people mention a compliance check for wildlife research that no one else seemed to have heard of. I moved the trailer a few miles away and stopped field work for a while. The forest felt different after that night with the light, like something had shifted, but I couldn't say what. I still go out sometimes to look up at the trees, but I don't expect to see anything. Just the normal night sounds and the occasional owl. That's it. No flash or boom, no obvious craft or beings. Just a quiet light, and two might, and two men who didn't quite belong, and a forest that doesn't behave like it used to. What I was doing, and listened. Something was coming from just beyond the tree line. Grabbing my flashlight, I headed toward the edge, trying to see what could be making that noise. That's when I noticed the lights. They weren't normal at all. Small and moving slowly just beneath the trees, they flickered faintly, more like pale bluish orbs gliding quietly through the shadows than flashlights or lanterns. The darkness and dense forest made it hard to tell how many there were or what was causing them to move. They didn't look like people or animals, nothing familiar. I quietly backed away and returned to my camp, phone ready, but careful not to make a sound. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe some research team running tests or a weird drone, but there was only a low, unchanging hum. That night I slept uneasily, waking several times to check the sounds. Nothing else happened. The next day, I hiked further up the trail to find more signs of activity. The forest was quiet, with just the usual rustle of leaves and distant bird calls. No unusual sightings. Back at my small rented cabin about 10 miles from the trailhead, I sat outside watching the stars. The night was clear and cold. Suddenly, headlights caught my attention, a black sedan moving down the nearby road. At first, I didn't think much of it. People sometimes drive out here late. But then I realized the headlights were completely off. I blinked, thinking I was mistaken. No, the car was definitely driving in darkness. It passed my cabin slowly, maintaining a steady pace, never speeding up or slowing down. For the next 2 nights, the same pattern repeated. Exactly every hour, the black car would drive past without headlights. I tried to flag it down the first time, flashing my flashlight, but it didn't react. No brake lights, no signals, just that steady, unnerving drive. The whole thing felt like a scene from a movie. I checked for power line issues or local outages, but everything else had lights. After the 3rd night, I mentioned the car to a local at a diner. He gave me a weird look and asked if I was sure it wasn't just a truck. The drive usually takes about 3 hours, depending on how much you want to explore the back roads. I left just after dinner around 7 p.m., trying to get ahead of the fog that typically rolls in around midnight during this season. About halfway through the trip, near Forge Mountain, my GPS suggested an unusual detour. I ended up near an old cabin off a remote forest road. As night fell, something felt off. A black car drove by occasionally, and I heard a faint hum outside that seemed to vibrate through the walls and floor. The local person I'd spoken to earlier had been cryptic. Some folks keep an eye on this place, he'd said with a shrug. You never know. I didn't press for more information, but the sense of being watched grew stronger with each passing hour. The next day, I hiked back to explore a nearby radar site. The forest felt dense, the air thick with an unexplained tension. I noticed something strange. Some old concrete slabs looked freshly cracked, as if something heavy had recently pressed down on them. I took pictures, unsure what to make of it. That night, just after midnight, the situation escalated. The black car stopped across the street, engine off, no lights on. A figure in dark clothes stepped out, stood perfectly still for a minute, then returned to the car and drove away without headlights. I packed up early the next morning, telling myself it was probably just a local prank or some kind of surveillance. But the memories lingered. The mysterious hum, the lights beneath the trees, the silent car. Weeks have passed and I still can't fully explain what happened. Late at night, sometimes I think I hear that low hum when the wind blows just right. I haven't returned to the area since. I don't know who was driving the car or what was really going on. But I know what I experienced was real, even if I can't quite understand it. I was driving down a quiet rural road in Arkansas, surrounded by pine trees and utility poles. My plan was to save a few minutes by skipping a construction area near Rolla, just another ordinary trip with nothing unusual in sight. Suddenly, something caught my eye. An old red and white striped radio tower stood just beyond the tree line, with a blinking beacon on top. Arkansas has hundreds of these scattered around, so nothing seemed out of place at first. But something felt different. The silence was unnatural. No bugs, no tree frogs, which was strange for late September. Then my car started behaving oddly. The engine didn't exactly stall, but softened, with RPMs dropping low even as I pressed the gas. Headlights dimmed, and dashboard lights flickered briefly. That's when I noticed the tower's beacon had stopped blinking. Instead, it was a steady, solid red glow. And then I saw it, something hovering above the tower, not directly over the light, but floating about 50 feet higher and slightly off to one side. A huge dark shape, like an overturned dinner plate. No lights, no reflection, just hanging perfectly still. I slowed to a crawl partially off the road. The radio was already off, but the screen showed only static and blank numbers. Without warning, the engine cut completely. No sputtering, just dead silence. I sat there, key turned, foot on the brake, completely uncertain. The cabin light turned on by itself. The AC blew hot for a moment, despite being set to cool. My hands were shaking, though I didn't feel cold. It was as if my senses were lagging, disconnected from reality. When I tried to restart the car, nothing happened, not even a click. Looking back, I saw the red light was gone. The object remained dark against the sky, a little wider than the tower's platform, and about half as tall. No sound, which was impossible given how close it was. Then it moved. Not rotating or tilting, but sliding smoothly sideways about 20 feet, then sinking behind the trees, like it was effortlessly descending into the forest. No bouncing, no jerking, just controlled, fluid movement. The next morning, I was cleaning pine needles off my windshield when a black sedan pulled up across the street. It was an unremarkable Crown Victoria, with tinted windows and a small antenna. A man in a suit and tie stepped out, white, maybe mid-50s, with no badge or clipboard. He walked up the driveway deliberately, like someone accustomed to going where he wanted. 6 feet from me, he smiled. I nodded back automatically. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. "I'm here to follow up on your vehicle malfunction," he said. "Last night, approximately 9:42 p.m., Highway 314, near the FN Tower west of Hollis." My stomach dropped. I couldn't speak. The paper looked like a waiver. Vehicle Malfunction Liabilities Release was printed in bold capital letters. Underneath was a paragraph of dense legal language about acknowledging no damage and confirming I hadn't filed a complaint. My name was already printed next to a blank signing line. "How did you know?" I started to ask. He just smiled. Not friendly, just flat. "No repairs necessary, correct? Vehicles functional." I nodded, not reaching for the paper. He tapped it once with his finger, a gesture that seemed to urge me to sign. I didn't. He held the paper out for a few seconds, then folded it back up and returned it to his coat. "Thank you for your time," he said, then walked back to his car and drove off. There was no visible license plate, or if there was, the numbers weren't recognizable. Later, I looked for tire marks. Nothing. No sign he'd ever been there. The car has been fine ever since. The night before had been strange. As if gravity didn't apply, I disappeared momentarily. The red beacon blinked once. The radio suddenly came back to life, cutting in mid-song like someone had unpaused it. The headlights brightened. I turned the key, and the engine started immediately with no issues. I didn't stick around. I floored it. The car fishtailed slightly on the shoulder before speeding back onto the main road. My hands didn't stop shaking until I hit Darnell. I got home late. Around 12:30 a.m. I told no one, Not my boss, not my roommate, not my parents. I didn't even write it down. I kept telling myself I was just tired, that the car had a simple hiccup, that the thing in the sky was a trick of light. Here's the rewritten text. I'm Evan, 31, working part-time at a hardware store in Santa Rosa. Surfing is my escape, the one thing that calms my brain since moving here from inland. I've been hitting this spot near Bodega Bay for weeks, usually arriving before sunrise to beat the crowds. That morning was different. Around 4:45 a.m., I parked at Devil's Spine, a narrow cliff stretch where waves typically break cleanly before the wind kicks up. Something felt off immediately. The air carried a strange metallic scent, and the tide moved unnaturally slow. Foam barely touched the usual rock markers. As I prepared to head down the steep, narrow trail, I noticed the sky changing. At first, I thought it was fog, but this was something else entirely. The stars above the water simply vanished. Not dimmed or obscured, completely gone. Weirdly, the sky behind me toward land remained crystal clear, with Orion and the Pleiades still visible. Crouching near a twisted pine, I rested my board against my knees and stared upward. The blank space looked wrong, almost like someone had cut a chunk out of the atmosphere. Absolute silence surrounded me, no gulls, no wind, no wave sounds, just an eerie pressure in my ears, similar to rapid altitude changes. The water had transformed into a flat, glassy surface. In 3 years of surfing this beach, I'd never seen anything like it. Not during calm days, not even during red tides. Something was definitely not right. I still drive this route sometimes for work. The radio works, but I never take that detour anymore. I've never seen that shape again, and I'm not looking to start. Nothing felt off as I stood by the surf path. Nothing moved, nothing approached, but a heavy weight pressed against my chest, urging me to leave. I quickly grabbed my board and hurried back to the van, an unremarkable silver 06 Dodge with sandy carpets and a busted sliding door that I never bother locking, used solely for early morning surf runs. When I reached the van after cresting the hill, everything appeared normal. No lights, no people around. Though shaken, I decided to call my buddy Darren from Salmon Creek to see if he'd noticed anything strange. But as I yanked open the driver's door and climbed in, I froze. A man was sitting in the back seat, completely motionless. Facing forward, hands flat on his knees, wearing a black suit and shirt. His skin was pale as paper, with no discernible age, neither young nor old, existing in some indeterminate middle space. No hair, no glasses, no jewelry. I couldn't speak, just stared through the rearview mirror, breathing hard. Does the ocean ever show you things? The voice was flat, hollow, as if emptiness spoke. When he slightly turned his head toward me, not fully, just enough to indicate awareness, he added, "You're here, often. Stay long enough, it shows you more." "What?" I finally managed to say. But he said nothing more, simply returning his gaze forward. I remained frozen, keys in hand, surfboard wedged against the passenger seat. When I turned to face him directly, he vanished. No sound, no movement, no disturbance to the gravel or surrounding grass. Gone, as if he'd never existed. For 10 or 15 minutes, I sat on the hood, fighting panic. I wasn't tired, hadn't been drinking, hadn't hit my head. Everything had felt brutally real. Eventually, I returned to the van, checking the rearview mirror. Now empty, containing only my crusty towel and a bag of fins. 9 drove home with the radio off, taking the long way on US 395 south from my sister's place in Carson City back to Bishop, California. It was late, around 11:45 p.m. on a cold, clear Tuesday in March. The road was quiet, stretching between black hills and desert scrub, with my headlights cutting through the darkness about 20 miles north of Bridgeport. That's when I saw the light. At first, I thought it was a flare or a low-flying plane, just a soft, yellowish glow about the size of a bus. It drifted slowly above the western ridgeline, not flickering or moving fast. Instead, it seemed to pulse gently as it floated sideways before dropping behind the hill and disappearing without a sound. I eased off the gas and pulled onto the shoulder, wondering if it might have been a crash or a weather balloon. As I sat there, trying to decide whether to keep driving, headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. They started far back but closed the gap quickly. A plain black SUV with deep tint and unusual government plates. The SUV pulled up behind me about 15 feet back. No one got out. The engine remained running, but the headlights went dark. I could hear it idling, surprisingly quiet for its size. I thought maybe they were highway patrol or BLM checking on me, but no one approached my window. Minutes passed, 5, then 10. I didn't go back to the beach for 2 weeks. When I finally returned, everything looked normal. The water was choppy, birds were back, but something felt off. The rails smelled faintly of copper, and I could have sworn the waves were breaking about 10 feet further out than before. I haven't surfed here since June. I drove home late that night, pulling into my 2-bedroom rental outside town. Nothing special, just a small place with a fenced-in yard and a cracked driveway, backing up to a dry creek bed. After parking, I sat for a moment before heading inside. The drive had been strange. Earlier, an SUV had pulled up beside me on the highway. I tried to catch a glimpse of the driver, but the tinted windows and angle made it impossible. Just a dark blob where someone should have been. We sat even with each other for about 20 seconds, the engine idling. Then it drove off smoothly, tail lights fading into the darkness. Inside my house, everything felt normal. I turned on the kitchen light, fed the cat, and poured a glass of water. I sat on the couch, scrolling through my phone, still buzzing from the weird encounter. Maybe 20 minutes passed. Then came the knock. 3 quick taps. Not loud, not the doorbell, just knuckles on glass. I froze, wondering if I'd imagined it, but it came again. Same rhythm, tap, tap, tap. I walked to the front window and pulled back the curtain. No car in the driveway. No movement on the street. I flipped on the porch light and opened the door. Nothing. But taped to the glass right at eye level was a black envelope. Matte finish, square corners, no markings. Just a piece of black tape holding it in place. I stood there for a long time before removing the tape. Inside was a single card. Heavy stock, like an expensive wedding invitation. Blank, except for a short line of printed text in the center. Not everything drifts down. I checked the street again. Quiet. Even the porch light seemed dimmer. I stayed up the rest of the night, not calling anyone. What would I say? Don't I keep an envelope tucked away in the drawer next to my bed? I never showed it to anyone, and I never tossed it out. For years, I worked as an air traffic controller at a small regional airport in northern Idaho. It wasn't a glamorous job, mostly small private planes and the occasional cargo flight. Just a quiet place that saw only a handful of flights each day. The tower was old, barely updated, and I was usually the only controller on duty. I actually enjoyed the solitude. It let me zone out, focusing on the radio chatter and my screens. Everything changed one evening in early October. Around 9:30 p.m., something caught my eye on the radar. The weather was clear and chilly, a crisp fall night with the moon overhead. Way above the usual flight paths, a massive object was sitting motionless over the western mountain range. At first, I thought it was a system glitch. I reset the radar, checked the power supply, and even restarted everything. The dot remained exactly where it was. I ran through all the standard checks. I reviewed the flight schedule and transponder list. I called the FAA regional office to ask about any unusual traffic. Nothing came up. No reported flights, no military exercises, no helicopters, no drones. This thing was massive compared to other radar blips, but it made no radio calls and showed no transponder code. Following protocol, I logged the unidentified stationary radar contact and sent the information up the chain of command. I figured someone might investigate. Around 11 p.m., the power flickered briefly, but the system stayed operational. Before midnight, the contact mysteriously vanished. The next day, normal, but something felt off. When I checked in with my supervisor by phone, she sounded distracted and slightly annoyed. She questioned my report and claimed the radar data showed nothing unusual in that sector. My front camera's motion activated now, sending clips to my phone when someone's near the porch. The last alert was at 8:17 p.m., hours before I'd go home. After that, just silence, a gap between then and sunrise. I don't drive that route unless absolutely necessary. No, a call came in one afternoon from an unrecognizable voice, claiming to be from a federal aviation agency. They said they would visit the tower for a routine check. Without specifying an exact time, around 7 p.m., 3 men arrived at the airport entrance, dressed identically in black coats and simple button-up shirts, without ties. They appeared to be in their late 40s, or early 50s, with short, graying hair and faces that seemed almost rehearsed in their friendliness. Their badges looked official but didn't match any federal or state agencies I knew. When I asked about their agency, they gave vague responses about special aviation oversight. They requested to see the previous night's radar logs and recordings, which I provided, screen prints, notes, and system recordings. They quietly skimmed through the materials, exchanging brief, low comments I couldn't understand. One of them looked up and remarked about my imaginative writing style in a polite tone that felt subtly threatening. They asked to calibrate some equipment and wanted access to the radar console for about 20 minutes. I agreed and stepped into the break room for a drink while they worked. When I returned, they had vanished without a trace. No goodbye, no note. The door was locked from the inside, so they must have left through the main entrance. That's when I realized the tower logbook was missing. The thick binder containing flight plans, radio calls, and my report about the strange radar contact. Calls to my supervisor and the FAA revealed no authorization for these visitors. Security cameras at the entrance were inexplicably offline that evening, supposedly for maintenance I hadn't been informed about. Over the next few days, I tried to investigate. The radar system showed no record of the contact, and my supervisor avoided discussing the incident, treating it like a mistake I'd imagined. I began scrutinizing the tower more carefully, searching for anything altered or missing. The only unusual thing I discovered was a faint smell of ozone or burning wires near the radar console. Those men and their strange badges kept replaying in my mind, their odd comments lingering like an unresolved mystery. My name is Jordan Mills, and I've been with the National Weather Service for about 5 years now, mostly doing remote monitoring and radar operations from small outposts like this one. This particular station sits on a ridge about 10 miles east of the mountain range itself, pretty isolated. Closest town is over an hour away, the kind of place where, if something weird happens, you're the only one around to see it. That night, in late April, around 10 p.m., I was running my usual scan on the Doppler radar. The job is mostly routine, checking for precipitation and wind patterns. A few hours earlier, I'd noticed something strange on the screen. There was this huge stationary mass hovering over the northern part of the San Gradito range. At first, I figured it had to be a glitch or some sort of interference, but I kept watching. It wasn't moving and it wasn't weather. No rain, no snow, just a dense, well-defined shape sitting there. I couldn't tell if it was a cloud or something else. I tried, adjusting the frequency and recalibrating the radar, but the shape stayed consistent, sharp-edged. I was unlike any formation I'd ever seen. I've tracked everything from thunderstorms to dust devils in my time. It covered an area at least 5 miles across, too big to be a plane or bird flock, and it wasn't on any satellite images. Around midnight, the station's old landline phone rang. I almost didn't answer it. Calls this late were usually from dispatch or maintenance, but something about the ringing made me pick up. A man's voice came through, low and calm. "We need to come by your station. It's regarding the equipment." I asked who was calling, but the line went dead before he answered. No caller ID, no trace. I wondered if they were some kind of government inspectors or maybe something else entirely. I stayed at the airport a little longer after my shift ended that week, waiting to see if anyone else showed up. No one did. Eventually, I left the job. The whole experience left me uneasy, like someone had quietly rewritten the facts of what I'd seen. Sometimes when I'm alone at night, I think about that dot on the radar, big, still, and unexplained, and the men who came to erase the record. I don't know what it was or who they were, but I know I wasn't imagining it. Around 1:30 a.m., something unusual happened at the station. A knock echoed at the front door, unexpected and against protocol. Through the security cameras, I spotted 2 men standing outside. They were almost identical, tall, mid-40s, wearing suspiciously pristine black coats. Their hair was slicked back, faces unreadable. Hesitantly, I cracked open the door. "Good evening," one said flatly. "We're here to calibrate your radar." I tried to refuse entry, citing authorization rules, but they produced a badge with an unfamiliar embossed seal that looked official enough to warrant consideration. Their movements were precise and quick. They went straight to the radar console, typing sequences I didn't recognize and adjusting frequencies in ways that didn't seem standard. No conversation interrupted their work, just the soft hum of equipment. 20 minutes later, they packed up silently, nodded, and left as abruptly as they arrived. After locking the door, I attempted to review the radar. Something was different. The huge stationary mass that had been there was the station felt strange, stale air, flickering screens. When I checked system logs, I discovered the past 8 hours were completely missing. Not deleted, just vanished. Backup drives were empty. Dispatch had no records. My supervisor seemed bewildered when I reported the incident, insisting no one had been authorized to enter and no security feed showed any visitors. Despite my first-hand account, he told me to document it and move on. Later that day, I went to the local diner for coffee, hoping to process the strange events. I mentioned the missing logs to a few locals, but no one reported anything unusual in the sky or mountains. I continued watching the radar, but the mysterious shape never reappeared. The way back to the trailhead started to feel strange. I was sure I heard footsteps behind me, just out of sync with my own. Every few minutes, I'd stop and look back, telling myself it was just nerves or maybe an animal. But something felt off. I picked up my pace. It all began on a solo hiking trip in early September, right after Labor Day weekend. I'd taken a few days off work to avoid the crowds in the Adirondacks. Living about 3 hours south near Pacopie, I was no stranger to these kinds of trips. Drive up, camp for 2 nights, pack light, get off the grid. I enjoy the solitude. Around 6:30 a.m., I parked at a trailhead near Indian Lake. One white Outback with Vermont plates was there, but no sign of anyone. My plan was a 6-hour loop hike. The weather was cool, low 60s, clear and perfect. The first few hours were typical. Deer, woodpeckers, the usual wilderness sounds. I stopped for lunch at a small ridge overlooking a dense patch of trees to the north. Around 1:30 p.m., I packed up and continued walking. About 2/3 through the loop I saw them. Lights, red ones, 3 of them maybe the size of a dime at arm's length. They flickered just above the tree line to my left, not quite in the sky, but just above the valley trees. They blinked rhythmically, but not in any pattern I recognized. I stopped and watched. No sound, no movement in the tree, just these lights hovering about 100 yards out. I started recording on my phone. They remained still blinking. When I zoomed in, the camera struggled to focus through the trees. I lowered the phone, trying to squint at them directly. When I looked back at the screen, they were gone. I stood there for another 5 minutes, trying to catch them again. Nothing. Late at night, I still checked the skies toward the Sangha Cristo Range. The radar never shows anything like that again. But every once in a while, when the wind is calm and the air feels thick, I swear I hear that low hum again, like the station itself is remembering. My equipment worked fine, except for the missing logs. I was driving south, the sun still hanging in the sky. My plan was to make it home before dark. Around Shrew Lake, a black car appeared in my rearview mirror. I couldn't make out the model, maybe a Dodge or a Lincoln. Deeply tinted windows blocked any view inside. At first, I thought nothing of it. The car wasn't tailgating, just maintaining the same pace. When I sped up, it sped up. When I slowed down, it did the same. After 30 minutes and 2 exits where I expected it to turn off, the car remained behind me. No license plates, just a blank surface. I tried to get a better look by switching lanes and even took a random exit near Ticonderoga to see if it would follow. It did. The sky was growing darker. I pulled into a small rest stop just to pull off with a trash can and a picnic table. I parked and killed the engine. The black car pulled in a few spots. No one got out. I waited, watching the mirror, my heart racing. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Eventually I started the car and pulled back onto the highway. The black car followed. Another hour of driving brought me past Albany, and I was thinking about getting gas. The fuel needle was low. I exited near a Sunoco station off Route 9 around Kinderhook. Darkness had fully fallen by then. The black car pulled into the far end of the lot while I was filling up, still without plates, just sitting there. Inside the station, I paid cash, mostly to keep an eye on the car through the windows. When I returned, they were parked right next to my car. The driver's side window was down. A man, maybe in his late 40s, clean-shaven, wore a plain black ball cap and zip-up hoodie. Expressionless, he held out a small black USB stick and said, "Replace your footage with this." When I didn't respond, he repeated it louder. I took the stick. I don't know why. He rolled up his window, reversed out, and drove away. I stood there, stunned, holding the USB for a long time before getting back in my car. The rest of the drive home was uneventful. No black car, no followers, just me, trying to understand what had just happened. That night, I didn't sleep. I plugged in the new USB, into an old laptop the next morning, one I hadn't used in years, completely empty. Just a single file labeled v.m 10 minutes long, but when I opened it, nothing but static. Not the visual white noise you might expect, just a grey screen with faint crackling in the background and a high-pitched tone every few seconds, like an old CRT TV powering up. We weren't looking for anything weird. Me and my buddy Greg were just at his uncle's hunting cabin for the weekend. It's up in northern Minnesota, about a 40-minute drive from any town, tucked between a frozen lake and long stretches of logging roads that don't get plowed in winter. No Wi-Fi, no cell service, no neighbors, just a wood stove and a stack of firewood as company. We arrived Friday evening, just after dark. February, probably 12D out, but the sky was clear and packed with stars. We'd brought food, beer, and snowshoes. The plan was to stay 2 nights, do some hiking, maybe ice fish if we could dig out the gear. Saturday morning, we took our time with coffee and eggs, then headed out around 11 o'clock. There's a narrow trail that cuts east from the back of the property, going through thick birch and pine stands, past a collapsed shed, and eventually climbing up a ridge. Greg mentioned there used to be an old fire tower at the top, though he hadn't been here in about 10 years. We packed lighter thermos and a couple granola bars and set out with snowshoes strapped to our boots. The snow was deep but packed enough in spots that you didn't sink too much. It took about 2 hours to reach the top of the ridge. Not steep, just steady. We didn't talk much on the way up. Too quiet out there. Your own footsteps were loud. Even the trees didn't creak. I watched the whole static video, waiting for something to pop out. It never did. I never shared the footage I took on the hike. Didn't delete it either. But when I went back to check, the video wouldn't load, just a corrupt file message. I tried copying it, renaming it, using print software. Nothing worked. The thumbnail was just black. A week later, I drove back to Indian Lake, not to hike, but to see if the white outback was still there. It wasn't, but parked in the same spot was another black car. Different model, same no-plate situation. I didn't stop, just kept driving. That was last fall. I haven't been back since. Note, we've been hiking near an old fire tower, its wooden steps mostly rotted, but the frame still standing, about 40 feet tall. A faded no trespassing sign hung loosely on one of the supports. Instead of climbing, we paused to catch our breath, watching crows drift overhead. The winter light had a strange bluish glow and the sun was already low despite it being only 3:30. That's when Greg spotted something unusual beyond the tree line to the west. Just past the tower, floating around 30 or 40 feet above ground, was a soft white orb about the size of a basketball. It didn't move, just hovered completely still. At first, we said nothing. I initially thought it might be sunlight hitting ice, but it was too high and too far away. Greg whispered, "That's not right." The strangest part was the absolute silence. Up that high, you'd expect wind or bird sounds, but there was nothing. When I tried to take a picture with my phone, the screen went glitchy with static bands. Then the orb moved slightly, not quickly, just a few feet higher and to the right, still completely smooth and silent. Moments later, it simply blinked out, not like it flew away, but just vanished. Greg muttered we should head back. We were walking faster, neither admitting how unsettled we were. The woods felt wrong, like something was watching us, matching our pace just out of sight. When we reached the cabin, dusk had already fallen. We didn't even remove our boots, just sat in silence before pouring whiskey. Later that night, after drinking, we tried to make sense of what we'd seen. Was it a drone? A flare? Some weather phenomenon? Nothing explained its movement. Too smooth. No. Flickering. Completely silent. Sleep was impossible. Every time I started to drift off, I'd hear what seemed like crunching snow outside. I'd sit up, listen, hear nothing. I didn't wake Greg, who was already tossing restlessly. Not Greg and I had been staying at his uncle's cabin, trying to shake off some nerves. We decided to head into town early one morning, about a 30-minute drive away. The local store sold an odd mix of jerky, propane, and crafts. We grabbed some snacks and filled up the truck's tank, attempting to make small talk. Back at the cabin, everything changed. Greg's truck was parked exactly where we'd left it, but a man was sitting in the passenger seat. He looked completely out of place. mid-50s, clean-shaven, wearing a black suit and coat. He seemed like a banker or lawyer. Except he was sitting in a remote cabin parking area. We froze. Completely stopped walking. The man slowly opened the door, stepped out and smiled. But it wasn't a normal smile. It was too wide, too long, like someone was practicing how a smile should look. His voice was unnervingly soft and clear, almost as if speaking directly into our minds. "That wasn't meant for you," he said. When Greg asked who he was, the man just kept smiling. Then he shut the truck door and walked straight into the woods. No coat, no gloves, no hat, as if the cold meant nothing to him. We didn't move. Just stood there, frozen. After about half a minute, Greg checked the truck. Everything looked untouched, but the interior was warm, as if the heat had been running. Yet the keys had been in Greg's pocket the whole time. We stayed one more night. No fire, doors locked, blinds shut. I didn't even take off my boots. Early the next morning, we left. We haven't been back since. Greg's uncle keeps saying we're welcome anytime, but we always make excuses. I've never really told anyone about what happened. What would I even say? That we saw a man in a suit who walked into the snow like it was nothing? That I still can't explain how he got into the truck? It was around 12:40 a.m. when I was driving home from my second shift at a packaging plant near Greensburg, Indiana. The roads were empty, typical for that stretch of CR 700E. Miles of corn and soy fields, occasional mailboxes at the end of gravel drives, no streetlights. I was almost home, finishing the last of my gas station coffee, when the radio started cutting out. Not static, just silence. The radio started dropping out, going silent for 2 or 3 seconds at a time before popping back in mid-sentence. I thought it was just my station, but flipping through others, I realized everyone was experiencing the same thing. Then my headlights dimmed, not completely, just down to about half brightness for a few seconds before returning to normal. Something caught my attention just off the left side of the road, about a quarter mile ahead. It was hovering in the air above a cut field, near an old half-collapsed barn with a rusted-out roof, a landmark I'd passed countless times before. This object was low, maybe 50 feet off the ground or less, and it was big. At first, it appeared as a dark mass blocking out the stars. No lights, no sound, just a black void hanging in the sky. As I got closer, the shape became clearer. A triangle, like a long, flat wedge with soft, rounded corners. It was massive, stretching almost across the entire field. The object wasn't completely stationary, but drifting slowly, balanced in the air, with a smooth, deliberate movement reminiscent of a blimp. 3 small, dull red lights marked the underside, positioned near each point. They weren't blinking or glowing, just present, like standby LEDs on electronic devices. I pulled over and rolled down my window, expecting to hear something, but there was nothing. Absolute silence. No crickets, no wind, not even the sound of my own engine. The air itself seemed to have stopped moving. I watched for 2 or 3 minutes, never thinking to take out my phone. I wasn't scared, just acutely aware of my isolation. Then, without rotating or tilting, the object began to rise slowly and steadily. It drifted straight up, remaining perfectly level, until it faded from view against the night sky. No flash, no change in those red dots. It simply ascended and disappeared. After waiting a minute, I drove home to my cul-de-sac in a newer subdivision outside Westport. I didn't tell anyone about what I'd seen. I microwaved some leftover mac and cheese, showered, and went to bed around 2 a.m. Sleep didn't come easily. Not from fear, but from a sense of being inexplicably wired, my mind unable to settle. It was an ordinary morning at 7:30, except for the garbage truck that always wakes up my dog. As I got up, fed her, and made coffee, something unusual caught my eye. A black sedan with tinted windows and no plates was sitting in my driveway, engine off. 2 men in dark suits stood outside, one near the front step, the other by the car. When I cracked open the door and asked if they needed something, the man closer to the house gave a polite, measured smile. "Just a few quick questions, ma'am, if you have a minute," he said. I stepped out onto the porch. Without introducing themselves, they began asking about my previous night's drive on County Road 700E near the collapsed barn. I confirmed I had been there on my way home from work. Then came the probing question, "Did you see anything unusual while driving?" I hesitated, carefully considering my response. The first man watched me intently, not threateningly, but as if studying my reactions. I admitted to seeing some weird lights in the sky. The second man, still standing by the car, then asked an unexpected question. Do you often imagine things at night? His tone was genuinely curious, like someone who had heard similar stories before. His partner remained silent, eyes locked on me. I firmly responded no, and reiterated that I was awake and certain about what I'd seen. They seemed satisfied. Before leaving, the man near me asked about outdoor cameras. When I said no, he simply nodded, thanked me, and they drove away. Later that day, I noticed something strange. My mailbox, part of a group box for the block, had a peculiar smear, like oil or ash. No other mailboxes were marked. I wiped it off, leaving a greasy grey streak, and ultimately threw away the paper towel. That night, my dog's behavior became odd. She refused to enter the backyard, standing at the door and whining. When I opened it, she backed away. I walked her out front instead, and she kept looking up at the sky, not barking, just watching. Weeks have passed since then. I haven't seen anything else, but now I take a different route home from work every night. No, I'd been out at the Yuma Proving Grounds eastern edge that afternoon, flying my drone. The location's a spot lots of people use to watch the sky, a flat desert landscape stretching in every direction, nothing but low scrub and distant mountains. I always follow the rules. There's a zone around the proving ground where hobbyists are told to stay clear, and I'm not one to cause trouble. I'd parked on a gravel pole-off just off Highway 95, launched from my truck's bed around 4:20 p.m. The weather was perfect, hot, dry, cloudless, with crystal clear visibility. My drone's a DJI Mavic 3 Pro, equipped with the best camera. The plan was simple. Capture a sunset time-lapse for some editing software I'd recently bought. I had a cooler, headphones, and a book. My intention was to stay until after dark. The first 30 minutes were completely normal. I was getting great shots facing west, catching low golden light over the sand and creating long shadows. While panning the camera north, something strange happened. A blur zipped through the frame. Fast, incredibly fast. At first, I thought it might be a bird, but when I reversed the footage and played it frame by frame, something felt off. This wasn't a bird. No wings, no recognizable shape, just a metallic flash like sunlight on chrome. Its movement was unnaturally straight and incredibly rapid. I started scanning the area, adjusting the gimbal. Seconds later, it happened again. This time I saw it clearly. A thin dark shape moving across the sky, too fast for a plane, completely silent. I hit record. The object made multiple passes, each time at a slightly different angle, almost like it was circling or scanning. It didn't look manned or even machine-built, about 10 or 15 feet long with no wings, no lights, no contrail. It would appear suddenly, shoot past in a straight line, then simply vanish. When I tried to get a top-down view, everything went wrong. The signal cut out abruptly. The video feed glitched hard and went black. My controller said signal lost, even though the drone was still in visual line of sight. Something wasn't right. I tried the return to home button. Nothing happened. Then the controller powered down completely. Battery was still at 70. When I looked up, the drone was gone. I was out in the desert, standing on the tailgate of my truck. I'd been scanning the horizon for a while, but there was nothing to see. The silence was eerie. I felt like I was being watched, even though I couldn't spot anything around me. I didn't pack up right away, just stood there waiting for something. Headlights, a sound, anything. But the desert stayed completely quiet. By the time I left, the sun had gone down. I got home around 8:45, back to my small house on the edge of Yuma, with its fenced yard. I backed into the driveway and sat in the truck with the engine running, feeling unsettled. Something about the desert's silence was stuck in my mind. Around 10:30, someone knocked on my door. Not the doorbell. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. My porch lights had been broken for months, so I grabbed a flashlight and checked the peephole. Nothing but darkness. I opened the door just a few inches. A man stood there. Average looking, could have been 35 or 55. He wore a black suit, plain tie, white shirt, with impossibly clean shoes, despite my gravel walkway. His hair was slicked back. When he smiled, it didn't reach his eyes. "You misunderstood the sky," he said. "Let's keep it that way." No introduction, no explanation. He just stood there, waiting for me to respond. I didn't move. One hand on the door, the other on an unlit flashlight. He didn't blink. Then he turned and walked down the steps, disappearing from my porch light. I waited. No car started, no taillights, just silence. That night, I barely slept. I kept the living room lights on, curtains open, checking the street every few minutes. The next morning, I went to my truck to find the drone missing. It had been in a locked hard case under the tunnel cover. The case was undamaged, still zipped but empty. No signs of forced entry. I searched everywhere. The truck, the garage, my office. I know I'd locked the case. I always do. I checked my Ring doorbell footage, hoping for answers, but the video simply froze at 3:12 a.m. before resuming normally. Never happened before. I still have the empty case. Filing a report seemed pointless. What could I say? Someone stole my drone after I saw something weird in the desert, and a man in a suit told me to forget it. Mid-October, I needed a break. Solo trip to Ridge Hollow Campground near the Allegheny Front. I'd camped here years ago with friends, but this time I wanted silence. Phone off, no emails, just trees and quiet. Most leaves had fallen, nights were cold, low 40s, but I had proper gear. The first night was completely normal. I parked at Site 12, hiked my pack a few hundred yards, and set up the tent before sundown. No other campers around, no cars, no distant fires, just wind through bare trees and occasional owl calls. I made ramen on my camp stove, read a paperback by headlamp, and went to sleep around 10. Midnight brought a bathroom necessity. The tent was cold. I didn't want to unzip unless urgent. Eventually, discomfort won. The fire had died. Just a few glowing charcoal chunks remained. I slipped on boots, walked a few yards out, then returned. Nothing felt unusual. Morning changed everything when I unzipped the tent. Something was off. The fire pit's rocks were rearranged into a perfect circle. Not just roughly circular, but geometrically precise. Uniform gaps equal spacing like someone used a compass. I knew I hadn't touched them. My small folding stove sat inside the ring unused. It was early. 6:12 a.m. I checked my phoneless signal out of habit. Almost unconsciously, I took one photo. Then I boiled water, made coffee, and sat trying to make sense of it. I didn't misunderstand what I saw, but I stopped flying my drone after that encounter. I decided to hike the red-blazed trail around noon, packing a small bag for a familiar route I'd done before. The round trip was about 5 miles, nothing too challenging, maybe a 30-minute trek. I looped past some rocky outcrops and climbed to a ridge with a decent view. That's when I saw him, standing just off the trail, not walking, like he'd been waiting. His outfit was clean and crisp, black pants and jacket, the kind of uniform you might see on rent-a-cops or private security. His movements were deliberate but not aggressive when he stepped onto the trail. "You camping alone?" he asked, his voice low and flat. I confirmed I was at Site 12. Then he requested to see my camera. Something felt off. I hadn't mentioned the Canon point-and-shoot to anyone, not even in the ranger station's logbook. When I hesitated, he simply repeated his request. Without really understanding why, I unzipped my day pack and handed over the camera. He didn't even scroll through the photos. Just held it, turned it once, and gave it back. "Please don't take pictures of the fire rings," he said. Then, as quickly as he'd appeared, he vanished into the trees, not walking away, just disappearing down the slope. I stood there, camera in hand, unsure what had just happened. The encounter made me uncomfortable enough that I didn't want to walk past that spot again soon. I finished the hike without taking any more pictures. Back at camp that evening, I checked my photos. The circle I remembered was initially there, clear as day, but an hour later, the thumbnail was completely black. Tapping it revealed a file-corrupted message, though all other photos remained intact. Sleep was difficult that night. No noises, no other people, but I kept waking up thinking I heard footsteps outside the tent, always fading when I sat up. The next morning the rocks had been moved again, not kicked or tossed, but laid out in a strange, curving arc away from the pit. I left them where they were. Since that day in mid-September, when the nights were just starting to cool off, I haven't camped alone again. My uncle had a fishing cabin near Lake Vermilion in Minnesota. He let me use it whenever I wanted. It was a simple setup. One room, a wood stove, and a small dock. No Wi-Fi, no cell service. That was the whole point. Late Tuesday afternoon, I arrived and took the old aluminum boat out with a six-pack and some tackle. I slowly rolled across the water, catching a few small walleye that I tossed back. As darkness fell, the lake became completely still. I cut the motor and let the boat drift, surrounded by absolute silence, except for water tapping against the hull. Around 10:30, a strange glow appeared in the lake's center. Initially, I thought it was another boat, maybe someone with a lantern or large LED lights. But this wasn't moving like a boat. Instead, it hovered about 40 or 50 feet above the water, just suspended there. A round, pulsing white light with no beam, no flicker, no sound, just a slow, rhythmic dimming and brightening. I killed my headlamp and watched, remaining perfectly still. I kept glancing at my watch, 10:41, feeling like I was losing track of time. Suddenly, the light changed from white to a pale orange, as if someone had flipped a switch. No gradual transition. Still no sound. I wanted to record it, but my phone was charging in the cabin. I sat frozen, unsure how long I watched. Maybe 10 minutes. Then, just like that, it vanished. Not flying off, but simply disappearing between one blink and the next. I remained on the water for another half hour, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Was it a drone? Some light trick? But there was no noise, no navigation lights, nothing you'd expect from a low-flying object. Back in the cabin, I locked the door. Something I rarely do, and collapsed on the cot with my boots on. I slept maybe 3 hours. By 7 the next morning, I was on the dock with coffee. Thick fog had rolled in, obscuring everything beyond the first tree line. Around 8, a black SUV approached down the gravel path. I heard the tires popping over rocks before I saw the vehicle. 2 men in black suits, no ties, emerged. One was tall and thin, the other broader and around late 50s. Without introductions, the older one asked if I'd experienced anything unusual on the lake the previous night. I chuckled and responded, "Like what?" He smiled, but not in a friendly way. "My name is Paul Donovan. I'm 32 and this happened last fall during a work trip through northern Arizona. I was driving back from a client meeting in Flagstaff late one evening, just me and the road. I left around 8 p.m., planning to spend the night in a motel near Winslow before heading home the next morning. The drive should have taken about 2 hours. The weather was clear but cold, with a sky full of stars. I don't usually drive that late, but it was the only way to fit the trip in. I was on Route 66 for a while, then switched to a smaller highway cutting through the desert and some forest patches. I remember being tired, but not sleepy. Just that calm exhaustion after a long day. What I don't remember is what happened after that. I woke up the next morning in my car, windows fogged up, parked on the shoulder of a dusty dirt road. Later, I found myself at a lake, and 2 men approached me. One asked if I had a depth finder. I told him I had an old basic sonar unit that shows depth and sometimes a fish icon. He then asked if I'd logged anything strange the night before. I said no, I wasn't even on, just fishing. The tall one never spoke, just walked slowly down the dock, looking out over the water. He had a notepad but didn't write anything. The older guy asked if I'd noticed any phone or radio interference. I said I didn't have service out there. He nodded, as if he already knew. There was a long pause. Then he said, real calm, "Might be a good idea to fish elsewhere for a while." He didn't sound threatening, more tired, like he was passing on advice he'd received. I didn't respond. They both walked back to their SUV with no license plates and drove off. I watched them leave. Later that day, I tried to check the depth finder's log, even though I told them it wasn't on. It has a tiny SD card that logs sonar history. When I opened it, the card was gone. Not removed, but completely gone. The slot was empty, yet the latch remained locked. You can't remove the card without unlocking it. I hadn't touched it, and hadn't looked at it in months. That night, I packed up and drove back to Duluth. Even though I'd planned to stay through the weekend, I didn't feel scared exactly. Just off. Like I wasn't supposed to be there. I haven't been back to that lake since. I don't know how to start except to say it happened exactly like this, and I'm still trying to make sense of it. The desert stretched around me, silent and cold. My car sat on an unmarked road with no streetlights or signs, just scrub brush and low hills. When I checked my dashboard, the clock read 5:47 a.m. which seemed impossible. My last clear memory was stopping for gas near Flagstaff around 10:30 p.m. Just 2 hours before. Somehow, those intervening hours were completely blank. No memories of driving, no recollection of passing towns or gas stations. The car showed no signs of any incident, no dents, no scratches, nothing to explain the missing time. Half my gas tank was full, though I couldn't remember refueling after Flagstaff. I stepped out into the cold, dry air. The desert around me carried the scent of sage and earth. No animals moved, no other vehicles were in sight. Just absolute silence broken by a faint wind. Deciding to find my way back to a main road, I grabbed my jacket and started walking. After about a mile, I hit a paved road and followed it east. Soon, a motel sign for Desert Pines Lodge appeared. I realized I was only 10 miles from Winslow, but in completely the wrong direction. My phone remained without service. The motel office was open and quiet. A woman who looked like she'd been working all night sat behind the counter. When I asked if anyone had called for me or if my car had been logged anywhere, she simply said no one had been around since the previous night. I rented a room and tried to rest, feeling unsettled by the unexplained gap in my memory. Around 9 a.m., still half awake, someone knocked at my door. Through the peephole, I saw a man in a black suit and long coat, his hair neatly combed, his face completely expressionless. "You're back early," he said. When I asked who he was, he didn't respond. As I cracked the door open, he suddenly stepped back and vanished. No sound of footsteps, no door opening, no car driving away, nothing. I blinked, wondering if I'd imagined the entire encounter. I don't even know where O's star with his. About a year ago, in late September, I was out in my backyard doing something I often do, taking pictures of the stars. I'm not a professional astronomer, just a hobbyist with a decent camera and cheap tripod. My name's Clara, and I live in a small town in northern Vermont. The night was cool, with a hint of summer still lingering. I'd set up near the edge of my property, where the trees thin out and the sky opens wide. It was just past 10 p.m., no moon, a really clear night, perfect for star photos. I'd been taking shots for maybe an hour, focusing on the usual stuff like the Big Dipper and Cassiopeia. At some point, I noticed a star in the east that wasn't like the others. It was blinking, but not like a plane or satellite. The blink was slow and rhythmic, almost like a signal. On, off, off, pause, on, off, pause. It caught my attention because none of the other stars were blinking at all. This wasn't the kind of flicker caused by atmospheric distortion or clouds. I watched it, trying to figure out if it was just a weird optical illusion or maybe a drone with a light. But it stayed perfectly still, keeping the same rhythm for at least 15 minutes. Then slowly, it started to descend. It didn't drop suddenly or streak across the sky like a meteor. Instead, it moved downward really slowly, like it was drifting or lowering itself behind the trees. That part really weirded me out. Later, I sat down on my bed, my heart pounding. I didn't tell anyone about the incident right away. Who would believe it? Throughout the whole day, I kept checking outside, half expecting something to happen. I called my office that afternoon and explained about the trip and how I'd lost time on the road. They said the client had seen me leave at 8 p.m., but no one knew where I was after that. My car was fine. Nothing seemed stolen or damaged. When I got home a few days later, I checked the GPS history on my phone. It showed the route from Flagstaff toward Winslow, but with a big gap between 10:30 p.m. and 5:30 a.m. and a weird detour on back roads I didn't remember taking. I asked a mechanic to check my car. They said everything worked fine. No problems with brakes, steering, or engine. I still don't know what happened that night or where I was during those missing hours. And I can't explain the man in black, but every time I'm driving late, especially on quiet back roads, I find myself looking over my shoulder just in case. And I kept my camera pointed at the sky and managed to get some shots of something unusual. Usually stars don't move like this, right? The blinking light grew bigger as I came closer to the treetops and then disappeared behind them. I waited another half hour to see if it would return, but it didn't. The next day, I told my best friend Maggie about what I saw. She teased me, suggesting I might have been looking at a blinking airplane light or a satellite, but I knew what I had seen. Over the next week, I kept looking up every night around the same time, hoping to see it again. It never showed up. Then, about 6 days later, I was sitting in the town library's small reading nook, surrounded by a stack of astronomy books. The library was quiet, almost silent enough to hear dust settling. While flipping through a book about constellations, a guy suddenly sat down across from me. He appeared without a sound, calm and composed, wearing a black jacket and jeans, looking normal, maybe in his late 30s, clean cut, but with a serious expression. Without breaking his gaze, he asked, "Are you still watching the sky?" Startled, I nodded, unable to formulate a response. He smiled briefly, not warmly, but more like confirming something. "You should be careful what you look for," he said. "Some things aren't meant to be found." Before I could ask who he was or what he meant, he stood up, left a small card on the table, and walked away. The card had a name, E-Cross, and an unfamiliar phone number, but no company or organization listed. I considered calling, but something held me back. Instead, I pocketed the card and left. That night, I returned to the same spot in the backyard, more prepared, waiting for the blinking star to reappear. But the sky was just regular stars. No blinking, no movement, just silence. Strange occurrences began in the following days. My phone would lose signal in random places, even at home where reception is usually fine. My camera's battery seemed to drain unusually fast, even when not in use, and I kept feeling watched. Not in a paranoid way, but with a quiet, constant awareness of eyes just out of sight. One evening, walking home from the grocery store, a short 5-minute walk, I noticed a car driving slowly past me twice. What was odd wasn't just the repeated pass, but that the car had no visible license plate, and the driver's face was completely obscured. The first time I noticed something strange was when I was out working. A guy in the library had caught my attention, and there was this blinking star that seemed off. When I passed by a second time, I caught the driver glancing directly at me. I quickened my pace and went inside without looking back. I told Maggie about the car, the guy, and the blinking star. She suggested reporting it to the police, but I felt that would only make me look crazy. What could they do? Some guy in a black jacket said weird stuff, and a blinking lights moved behind the trees. It all sounded ridiculous. One warm night, I left the back door slightly open while working inside. I was editing photos when a low humming noise outside caught my attention. It was like a distant engine, but smoother and quieter. The sound lasted about 20 seconds before fading away. I stepped outside and looked up, but the sky was empty. No blinking light, no strange shapes. The next morning, my camera was missing from the kitchen table where I'd left it. The back door was closed, and the lock looked untouched. I never found the camera. After that, I stopped going outside at night. I tried to put it all out of my head, staying inside during evenings. But I kept thinking about that blinking star, the slow descent, and the man at the library. Sometimes, when the wind is just right, I swear I hear that low hum again. I'm Sarah Donovan, a journalist who spends too much time covering rural mysteries and local oddities that usually get forgotten or laughed off. This story began like many others. A farmer calling about weird crop damage outside La Mesa, Texas. Nobody could explain how or why it happened. I figured it would be something simple like pests or weather, but I wanted to see for myself. It was a typical early summer afternoon. The sky was bright with a few wispy clouds, and the air smelled of dry grass and dust. I drove my old beat-up pickup down a dirt road to the field's edge. The corn looked healthy, except for one 50-foot patch where stalks were flattened and bent in odd directions. It didn't look like normal wind or rain damage, almost as if someone had deliberately walked through and pushed the plants down in a specific pattern. I spent hours photographing everything, trying to capture different angles and close-ups of the stalks and ground. The soil was hard and cracked in places, and I noticed a faint, almost metallic smell. I shrugged it off and took some notes. Jim seemed nervous, keeping quiet about something that clearly troubled him. He kept saying, "It's not normal." That evening, back in my motel room, I was reviewing my notes and photographs when my phone rang. It was one of those mysterious calls where the number appeared, but silence greeted me. Static and faint clicking sounds filled the line. What started as what I assumed was a bad connection soon became something more unsettling. Slow, deliberate breathing emerged alongside the clicks. Not heavy or ragged, just present. I listened for 2 full minutes, but nothing more happened. Attempting to call back sent me straight to voicemail. I initially dismissed it as a prank, possibly related to my ongoing story, but the strange breathing lingered in my thoughts. The next morning, I shared the experience with Jim. His response was chilling. "You're not the only one. Some of us have been getting these calls lately. No one talks, just that noise. People say it's nothing, but it feels significant." Driving back to town, an eerie sensation of being watched settled over me. It was subtle, like a weight pressing against my chest. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see a follower, but the road remained empty. That evening, as I unloaded my belongings at my La Mesa apartment, a knock came at the door. The sky was darkening, painted in dull orange sunset hues. When I opened it, a man stood before me, entirely dressed in black, from his jacket to his low-pulled cap. He looked deliberately inconspicuous. Silence hung between us momentarily. Then, quietly, he uttered, "Stories can disappear, too." Before I could respond, he turned and vanished down the street. No traces remained, no car, no footprints. Afterward, my phone continued its strange calls, silent, with clicks and breathing. I stopped answering. My work on the crop damage story began unraveling. My notes seemed to shift subtly. Details I was certain I'd written appeared different upon review. Photographs developed odd shadows and shapes I didn't recall. When I mentioned these experiences to others, no one else acknowledged anything unusual. Something was happening, but I couldn't explain what. Not warning or just a weird coincidence. But something about it made me pull back. I still don't understand what any of it meant. Just that for a while I was caught in something that didn't quite belong here, and I didn't want to be talked about. It was a late summer evening in northern Michigan, one of those nights where the air gets cool but not cold, and the sky is clear enough to see a billion stars. We were all outside in the backyard, just the four of us. Me, my wife Lisa, and our two kids, Abby and Max. We'd been sitting around a small fire pit roasting marshmallows and talking about nothing in particular. Max was trying to convince Abby that his flashlight could cut through anything, just kid stuff. The whole yard was lit by the fire and some old string lights Lisa had hung up along the deck railing. That's when Abby pointed up, suddenly quiet, staring toward the woods at the edge of our property. "Look," she whispered. I followed her gaze and saw 3 perfect circles of light drifting slowly across the yard. They were about the size of basketballs, maybe a little bigger, glowing with a soft, almost oily white light. Not like bulbs or flashlights, more like light without a source, just hanging in the air. They moved slowly, side by side. No sound, no flicker, just steady and smooth, like gliding on invisible rails, maybe 2 or 3 feet above the grass. Lisa and I exchanged a glance. "Do you see that?" she asked. Max was wide-eyed, frozen next to Abby. I tried to keep calm, but honestly, I didn't know what to say. I grabbed my phone, thinking to get a picture, but when I unlocked it and pointed toward the lights, the screen just went black. No camera, no flashlight, nothing, like the phone was dead even though it wasn't. We watched those lights drift slowly toward the tree line, and then disappear behind the pines, leaving no sound, no rustling branches, no movement at all. We all just stood there for a minute, not saying much. The fire crackled. Max finally broke the silence with, "What was that?" I didn't answer. Later that night, I kept checking the yard from the kitchen window, but nothing else showed up. The night went back to normal. The usual sounds of crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl. Next morning, Lisa was the first one to notice something strange. "Our Garrison," she said, "was talking with some guy wearing a black jacket, black pants, like he was trying to disappear in the morning fog. When the strange events began, it wasn't dramatic. Mr. Smoker, Garrison, an older man who mostly kept to himself, had a brief encounter with someone Lisa described as a man in black. This person didn't stay long, just a quick, quiet conversation lasting about 5 minutes before driving away in a dark sedan. Later that day, I tried asking Mr. Garrison about the encounter, but he simply blinked and said, "I didn't talk to anyone." Something felt off. When I mentioned it to Lisa, she shared another peculiar detail. Our always locked mailbox had been opened. Inside was a black folder, thin, slick, and completely blank. What struck me was the folder's unusual temperature. It felt warm, as if it had been sitting in sunlight. Despite the cool early morning, I placed it on the kitchen table, but it didn't cool down for hours. That night, the kids were restless, and Lisa kept glancing out the windows, seemingly expecting those lights to reappear. The next few days seemed normal, but an unsettling sensation lingered. We felt watched, that eerie feeling of not being alone, yet unable to pinpoint who else might be present. Strange noises began, faint humming, sometimes outside the window, sometimes within the walls. Not loud enough to be certain, but enough to make me pause and listen. One morning, the black folder had vanished. No note, no indication of how it disappeared. I asked neighbors if they'd noticed anything unusual, but no one had. Mr. Garrison remained reclusive, his eyes darting away whenever I looked his way. We returned to our routines, but the feeling never truly left. Occasionally, when I'm outside alone, I catch a glimpse of something just beyond the yard's edge. A flash of white light, a shifting shape between trees. Each time, I wonder, is someone still watching? This all happened after another experience, out on the dock of my small cabin on Lake Crescent in Washington. Just after sunset, the sky was clearing following a light rain. Everything smelled of wet pine and earth. I was playing with my phone, trying to capture some evening light over the water, just quiet nature clips with no fancy editing. That night, something unusual caught my attention. At first, just small pinpricks of light hovered over the lake's far shore, near some steep hills. They weren't like stars or familiar celestial objects. Now first, the light seemed natural, faint and steady, shifting positions slowly in a way that didn't follow any clear pattern. When I zoomed in with my phone camera, I saw soft blue and white glows that were dim but unmistakably present. One light blinked off and then reappeared a few seconds later, slightly higher and closer to the shore. The lake was quiet, with only occasional fish splashes and wind rustling through trees breaking the silence. That's when I noticed a figure standing completely still at the opposite edge of the dock, near the water. I hadn't heard any approach, no footsteps, no voices. The person was dressed entirely in black, not just dark clothing, but something that seemed purposefully designed to blend into the night. No hat, no reflective surfaces, just pure black. I initially thought it might be someone fishing or wandering, but something felt off. The figure didn't move or shift weight at all. I called out first softly, "Hey, are you okay?" Then a bit louder, "Hello, do you need help?" The response was unsettling. The figure slowly turned its head toward me, not in a natural way, but almost mechanically. Then it began moving sideways, gliding along the shoreline while maintaining eye contact. Suddenly, it moved behind a group of trees and vanished without a sound. No broken branches, nothing. By the time I lowered my phone, the mysterious lights across the lake had disappeared completely, as if they had never existed. I couldn't determine whether I'd imagined the entire encounter or if it was real. Back inside the cabin, I double-checked the door locks. My phone had no signal, which wasn't unusual in this remote location, but the night felt heavy, as if something was watching from the dark woods. The next morning, after getting coffee in Port Angeles, I returned to find a black sedan parked near the cabin, a vehicle that hadn't been there the night before. The car was meticulously clean, with no visible license plate, and windows tinted so darkly that the interior was completely obscured. No one was around. Though I initially thought it might be a local checking the area, the road was a dead end rarely used, especially midweek. As I approached the vehicle, a sense of unease grew. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, signaling something was not right. Nothing seemed quite right. A sedan sat in the driveway, and through the tinted windows, a brief movement caught my eye, but when I stopped to look closely, nothing was there. I carefully checked the area around me. No footprints marked the ground, and no other vehicles were nearby. The car remained parked all day, and I hesitated about calling the police. They would likely dismiss my concerns as the ramblings of a local or a lost traveler. Instead, I stayed inside with the windows locked. The entire afternoon, I watched the woods intently, sensing someone might be lurking just beyond my line of sight. By evening, the sedan had vanished, just like the mysterious figure from the previous night. I've returned to the cabin several times since, but nothing similar has ever happened again. No unexplained lights, no strange figures, no mysterious vehicles. Yet the memory of that quiet night lingers, how that silent figure watched without a word before disappearing without a sound. Our journey through the Mojave Desert began just after sunset. Karen and I were driving back to Los Angeles from a weekend in Vegas. The sky was warm, shifting from orange to purple, while the desert quickly cooled around us. It was one of those peaceful drives where soft radio music accompanies the rolling miles. I was driving, and Karen played with the radio, searching for a station. Suddenly, a strange light appeared just beyond the highway, rising slowly over a low ridge, like a detached headlamp or flare. It hung steady, a solid white glow, perfectly round and motionless. In an instant, the light vanished, as if switched off, and simultaneously the radio died. Static consumed the car, growing louder until Karen switched it off completely. We exchanged a look of shared bewilderment. "Did you see that?" I asked. She nodded, squeezing my hand. The road behind us remained empty. No other vehicles, no flashing lights, just us and an overwhelming silence. We continued driving as the desert darkened, eventually spotting a rest stop ahead. I was hiking the Ridge Trail in northern Vermont early one October morning. The air was crisp and cool, with a light fog hanging low between the trees, making everything feel hushed and still. I'd left the trailhead around 7 a.m., hoping to cover some ground before the sun got too high. This wasn't my first time on this trail, but something felt different today. Later that night, I found myself at a remote gas station with Karen. Our car pulled up to the pumps next to a tiny store. The engine went quiet, and the atmosphere immediately changed. The air felt thicker, heavier. It wasn't peaceful silence, just empty, with an unsettling stillness. We stepped out, stretching our legs, both of us scanning the area as if expecting something to emerge from the shadows. Near the payphones at the edge of the parking lot, a man caught my attention. He stood perfectly motionless in a plain black suit, his hair slicked back. His face was unreadable in the dim light. What struck me was his strange behavior. He wasn't on his phone or even holding one. Instead, his lips were moving, silently mouthing a single word. "Back." I looked away momentarily, then back again. He was still there, watching us. Karen noticed him too, giving me a quick nod that seemed to ask, "Do you see that?" We got back in the car without much conversation, locking the doors. As I backed out, I glanced at the man again. He remained rooted to the same spot, completely still. We drove on, the car's silence feeling heavier than before. The radio had been dead for miles, then suddenly came back to life. Static faded, and a station hummed through the speakers. I tried changing channels, but everything worked normally now. Neither of us spoke much. Karen kept checking the rearview mirror, and I frequently glanced at the side mirrors, half expecting to see the man following us, or that strange light rising behind a hill. By the time we reached the city limits, night had fully settled. The weirdness felt like a bubble about to burst, and we were both relieved to be out of that empty desert stretch. When I got home, I checked the news. No power outages, no missing people, nothing unusual. Sometimes, when I'm driving late or sitting on the porch, I think about that light rising behind the hill, and the man mouthing back at that rest stop. I don't know what it meant. Maybe it was nothing, but it stuck with me. That quiet, watching feeling. I don't bring it up, not even with Karen. Some things you just keep to yourself. The trail was eerily silent as I hiked. No birds chirped, no animals rustled, only the crunch of my boots on fallen leaves broke the stillness. About 2 miles in, something changed. I started hearing a strange sound behind me. At first, I thought it was just my footsteps echoing or branches snapping, but then the noise shifted. A faint mechanical clicking began, like tiny gears turning or metal tapping. It wasn't natural. I stopped and turned around multiple times but saw nothing. Just an empty trail surrounded by thick trees. I picked up my pace, trying to ignore the sound. Yet the clicking continued. Not right behind me, but close. It was a soft, I scanned the underbrush for any sign of wildlife, but nothing moved. No birds, no squirrels. I tried convincing myself it was a loose pack pot or a falling rock. When I checked my gear, everything was secure. No loose straps could explain the noise. I even dropped my pack and stood still, listening. The clicking paused briefly, then resumed, faint but definitely mechanical. As the sun broke through the trees and fog lifted, the sound persisted. A weird pressure emerged, like something watched me from just beyond reach. The trail felt longer, the woods denser. I wanted to turn back, but refused to admit I was scared. By noon, I reached the parking lot. My old Subaru sat near the entrance. A man in a black suit stood beside it. Neat, pressed, no tie, his hair slicked back, face expressionless. He wasn't on a phone or doing anything specific, just brushing dust off his shoulders. Except there was no dust. His suit was too clean, too perfect for the dirt lot. I approached cautiously. "Hi," I said. He looked at me slowly and nodded. "That sound you heard?" he said. "It isn't for you." His calm, low voice made me shiver. Before I could ask what he meant, he turned and walked into the trees, vanishing into the fog like a ghost. I stood there, wondering if I'd imagined the entire encounter. Driving home, the mysterious sound and the strange man lingered in my mind. I was camping alone out near the Sawtooth Mountains in Idaho, trying to get away from everything for a few days. Just me, a small tent, and a couple of books. It was late September, and the nights were already chilly, but the days were still warm enough to sit outside and watch the sunset without a jacket. On the second evening, I was sitting by the YI fire just after twilight, watching the sky darken and the stars start to come out. I'd already eaten and was about to pack up the fire when I noticed something weird out beyond the ridge a few hundred yards from my camp. There was this light, a soft glowing orb, maybe the size of a basketball, just hovering a little above the ground. It wasn't blinking or flashing like a plane or helicopter, and it didn't move in a straight line. It sort of drifted slowly, almost floating in no particular direction. The light was a pale blue-white, almost like moonlight, but more intense, and it didn't cast shadows on anything around it. I kept watching, thinking it might be some kind of drone or a lantern someone had left loose. But then it started moving toward the ridge, slowly at first, then faster, like it was gliding. I could see it disappear behind the trees and the ridge. No sound at all, no engines or buzz, just the quiet of the forest around me. After a minute or so, I got up and started walking back to my tent. That's when I noticed a car parked maybe 50 yards away, just sitting on the edge of the clearing where I'd set up camp. It was black, no logos, no decals, just a clean, dark sedan. The headlights were off, but the engine was idling. You could see the exhaust in the cold air, steady and quiet. I froze for a second, staring at the car. I hadn't heard it arrive. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the nearest road was at least a mile away. I thought about calling out, but something made me stay quiet. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out. He was wearing a dark suit, buttoned all the way up with a white shirt and a thin black tie. His hair was neat, and his face was expressionless. He looked me straight in the eye when he came closer, standing maybe 10 feet away. "Some things aren't meant to be found," he said without any introduction or explanation. I opened my mouth, wanting to ask what. As time passed, I never heard the strange clicking sound again, and I didn't see the man in black anywhere else. I don't know why that clicking was there, or who that guy was. I guess some parts of the trail aren't meant for us, even if we think they are. I was driving through the Mojave Desert late one night, heading back to LA after visiting a friend in Nevada. One of those solo trips where the road feels endless and the radio eventually fades out because you're so far from any city. Hours on the road, the air outside, dry and cool, even though it was summer, and the sky was pitch black except for stars. Somewhere around midnight, about 50 miles from the nearest town, a faint glow caught my eye off to the right above the desert floor, but below the stars. At first, I thought it might be a flare or campfire, but it didn't flicker like a flame. More like a hovering light, round and steady, maybe the size of a basketball. It glowed with a soft white light that pulsed slowly, almost breathing. I pulled over on the shoulder, curious but cautious. The desert was silent except for the hum of my engine cooling down. When I stepped out and looked toward the light, it hovered maybe 20 feet off the ground, not moving much, just gently pulsing. No sound, no wind, no bugs, nothing. Just that orb of light. I wanted a better look but didn't want to get too close, so I stayed near the car, shining my flashlight in its direction. The light from the orb seemed to dim and brighten in response, like it was aware of me. I felt a weird chill, even though it wasn't cold. Then movement near the car. A man walking toward me from the darkness. Black suit perfectly pressed, white shirt underneath, no tie. His shoes made no sound on the gravel. I hadn't seen him approach at first, and I didn't hear footsteps, He was just suddenly there. He stopped about 10 feet from me, hands at his sides, eyes locked on mine. His face was pale, expressionless, but somehow serious. He meant to say something, but nothing came out. He nodded once, then walked back to his car, got in, and drove off slowly, tail lights fading into the trees. I stayed there for a long time after he left, watching the place where he disappeared. The forest was still quiet, but the feeling of being watched lingered. I wasn't sure if I should stay or pack up and leave, but I chose to stay the night. Nothing else happened, and in the morning the clearing looked normal. No footprints besides mine, no sign the car had been here. I packed up and left that day, driving out through the winding mountain roads, thinking about the light, the man, and that strange warning. I don't know what I saw or who that guy was, but something about it all stayed with me on the drive home. The desert was completely still. No breeze, no sound, except for our breathing. Without a word, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. His calm, quiet voice instructed me to forget what I saw and keep driving. Then he walked back into the darkness, vanishing almost immediately. The mysterious orb disappeared with him. I stood frozen, holding the paper and slowly unfolding it. Instead of a note or warning, there was just a strange symbol, like a broken sun or a cracked compass. Uneven lines radiated from a circle, forming something I didn't recognize. I climbed back into my car, still feeling unsettled, and started driving. The empty, silent road stretched before me. I glanced at the paper again. No change, no glow, just a weird crude drawing on plain paper. Questions swirled in my mind. Who was that man? Why did he want me to forget? What did the symbol mean? I never saw the orb again, never saw the man in the suit. But sometimes, driving alone at night, I look out into the desert and wonder if that quiet glow is still somewhere, watching. My hike in the Adirondacks happened on an early fall afternoon. I was trying to squeeze in a trail day before the weather turned cold. Panther Gorge wasn't popular, but that was precisely why I chose it. Quiet, remote, mostly untouched. I'd been hiking alone for hours. The sky was partly cloudy, with that low grey light that makes everything feel muted. Halfway through the loop, the path narrowed to barely more than a dirt track. The woods thickened around me, and suddenly, all sound disappeared. Dead silence. Strange enough to make me stop and listen. Then a flash, brighter than a camera or lightning bug, came from just off the trail, deep in the woods. I squinted into the shadows, but saw nothing. The silence was intense, the kind that makes you hyper-aware of every tiny sound. Whenever I thought I heard something, it vanished instantly. After about 10 minutes, the trail opened into a small clearing near the road leading back to the trailhead parking. No, I was hiking and feeling uneasy about getting off the trail before dark when I spotted a black sedan parked on the roadside. Its engine was running, but the lights were off. The car looked like something you'd see in the city, an older model with no distinguishing features. The driver caught my attention. He seemed ordinary at first glance, mid-40s, clean-shaven, with dark hair slicked back, wearing a black suit and open-collared white shirt. His expression was calm, almost unreadable, but he was looking directly at me. When I slowed down, he asked, "You okay?" in a clear, low voice. I mumbled that I'd just finished my hike, noticing my voice sounded strange in the still air. His next words carried an unexpected weight. "The forest keeps its secrets," he said. "Respect them." I wasn't sure how to respond. When I tried to clarify, asking if he meant the light or the silence in the woods, he simply shook his head. "Not everything is meant to be understood," he told me. "Sometimes the best thing is to walk away." Before I could ask anything more, he closed the window, started the engine, and slowly pulled away. The car turned onto the road and disappeared around a bend. I stood there for a while, watching, feeling the cold seep into my bones as the sun began to set. The strange encounter lingered with me as I returned to my car. Something about the moment felt unnatural. That night, driving home, I couldn't shake thoughts of the man, the car, and the inexplicable silence. Nothing about the experience made sense, and part of me didn't want it to. The woods held their mystery, and I was content to leave it that way. The night was incredibly still as I drove. A faint glow caught my attention, and I slowed down, squinting to understand what I was seeing. About 100 feet above the ground, just off the road, hovered an object with soft, fuzzy edges. It wasn't a typical aircraft, no blinking lights or standard signals. Instead, it emitted a calm white light that seemed to pulse gently, almost like it was breathing. The sky behind it was crystal clear, with stars providing a sharp backdrop. I pulled my truck onto the shoulder and killed the engine, reaching for my phone to capture the moment. But something strange happened. The screen flickered and went black when I tried to take a picture. Frustrated, I set the phone down and continued watching. Minutes passed, and the light began to fade slowly as if someone were dimming a switch. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished completely. The silence was profound. No engine hum, no buzzing, just the typical desert night sounds. Distant coyotes howled, and wind whispered through trees. My heart was racing, but I wasn't panicked. More than anything, I was confused, wondering if I'd witnessed some unusual light phenomenon or an unknown military test. Just as I prepared to restart the engine and continue driving, headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. An old black sedan pulled up quickly, stopping about 20 feet behind me. Something felt off. No visible license plates, tinted windows. The driver rolled down the passenger window, and a calm but firm voice spoke. "You didn't see anything," he said. I blinked. "What? Keep your eyes on the road," he repeated. The forest was dark and silent. The highway behind the car stretched empty. My stomach tightened. "Who are you?" I asked. "No one you need to worry about," he responded. His eyes were steady, his expression unreadable. In an instant, the sedan peeled away, tires making almost no sound, disappearing into the night as if it had never existed. I checked my mirror, but the road was empty, just desert and stars. I tried to resume driving, but something had fundamentally changed. I was out in my backyard late one night, just like I often do, trying to get a few decent shots of the night sky. I'm not a professional by any stretch, just someone who's always loved looking up, figuring out the constellations, playing around with my camera. The air was still cool, but not cold, with a thin layer of fog settling in after a light rain earlier. Perfect for stargazing, or so I thought. I'd set up near the edge of the yard, pointing my camera toward a cluster of stars I'd read about a few weeks back. I was just snapping away, adjusting the focus and aperture, when something weird caught my eye. One of the stars in that cluster blinked out, not like it faded gradually or got covered by a cloud, just blinked like a light bulb switching off. I figured maybe it was my eyes playing tricks on me, so I kept watching. Then another star blinked out, and another right in sequence. Each went dark one after the other, like they were disappearing from the sky entirely. It was slow, almost like a pattern, but I couldn't tell what it meant or if it meant anything at all. The whole cluster dimmed out until only one or two stars were left. I was frozen, staring, trying to convince myself I was imagining it. I looked around my yard for a moment. No planes, no drones, no flashes from neighbors, just the quiet night and the fading stars. Then, after a minute, the stars blinked back on exactly in reverse. I kept glancing in the mirror, half expecting to see the black car again. The rest of the trip was uneventful, but I felt watched, like something was lingering just beyond sight. When I finally pulled into the truck stop in Prescott a few hours later, I checked my phone again. The pictures I tried to take were gone, not just missing from the camera roll. They'd been wiped clean, like the files were deleted at the source. I hadn't touched the phone since then. I told a couple of other drivers what I'd seen, but mostly got shrugged off or jokes. Maybe they think I'm making it up. Or maybe they just don't want to get involved. I still don't know what the light was or who that guy in the black car really was. The whole thing feels like one of those things you're not supposed to talk about, but it happened and it stuck with me. I've driven that highway hundreds of times before, but since that night, something's different. Like the road isn't just asphalt and dirt anymore. There's something watching, something waiting. I haven't been back out that way since. Not alone. I went camping alone in the Cascade Mountains a few weeks ago. Hiking a lot that summer, mostly solo. The night was quiet, and the stars seemed unusually bright. Something felt different, unnatural, almost synchronized order, like someone had switched them off and on. The whole thing took maybe 5 minutes, but it felt much longer. The next morning, I went to the cafe where I work, a local spot I've been at for a couple years, working mornings mostly. Two men in black suits were sitting quietly in a corner table. They didn't look like tourists or regular customers. One wore sunglasses even though the sun was barely up and the cafe was dim inside. They didn't order anything or look away from me the entire time I was behind the counter. My hands were shaking a little, but I took a few more photos before packing up and heading inside. I told myself it was some weird atmospheric thing or maybe a glitch with my eyes or the camera. At the cafe, I felt like these men were waiting for something or someone. I tried not to let it get to me, but I kept stealing glances their way. Eventually, I walked over and asked if they wanted coffee. The one without sunglasses looked up, gave me a faint, tight smile and said, "Just keeping watch." No further explanation. Nodded, said okay, and went back to work. Throughout the day, they stayed watching, no phones out, no reading, just sitting and looking. I tried to act normal, but it felt like the walls were closing in. When my shift ended, they left without a word, slipping out the door like they'd never been there. I kept thinking about that night sky and those blinking stars, then those men watching me like I was the only thing that mattered in the room. I don't know if they were connected or if I was just imagining things getting weird. Since then, I've tried to avoid going outside at night to look at the stars. The sky feels different now, empty, like something's missing or watching back. I've checked my photos and videos from that night a dozen times. The stars blinked for real, but no one else saw it. No one, I told, believed me. I haven't seen those men again, but sometimes when I'm at the cafe early, I catch a glimpse of a black suit in the window reflection or feel like I'm being watched. Even when it's empty, I don't have answers. Just a feeling that some things aren't meant to be seen, and some people make sure of that. And I went on one of my usual camping trips, seeking solitude away from the noise and stress of work. This time, I chose a quiet spot near a small lake, far from the main trail and other campers. As always, I skipped checking in with the ranger station. I prefer isolation. Late afternoon saw me setting up my tent just before sunset. The air carried a soft late summer warmth, not hot, but comfortably pleasant. After having dinner, I settled into my sleeping bag, headlamp off, gazing at stars peeking through pine branches. Around midnight, something woke me. At first, I thought it might be an animal, like a raccoon or deer. But these footsteps were different. They weren't random or hurried. Instead, they were slow, deliberate, almost calculated. The steps circled my tent methodically. Right side, back, left side, then back again. I remained completely still, listening. The footsteps continued their pattern, occasionally pausing right outside the tent fabric. In the darkness, I couldn't see anything. My flashlight was inside the tent, and I didn't want to move and risk alerting whatever was out there. The sound was soft yet distinct, like someone pacing, watching, perhaps contemplating something. For about 20 minutes, I stayed motionless, hoping whatever it was would leave, but the circling continued. Suddenly, everything went silent. No wind, no wildlife sounds, just an oppressive quiet pressing against the tent walls. Then the footsteps started again, even slower, gradually fading into the trees. I couldn't relax for the rest of the night. Forest felt different, no longer comforting, but unsettling. The next morning, I packed up early and headed back to the trailhead, deciding to check in with the ranger station. When I arrived, the station was empty except for a man in a black suit, an unusual outfit for a mountain ranger. He looked up and asked, "Are you Emily Parker?" Surprised, I cautiously confirmed. I hadn't told anyone my full name and hadn't checked in anywhere. He just smiled faintly. No, I was out in the mountains near Bend, Oregon, one late summer evening, just after sunset. The sky was clear, a little chilly once the sun dropped, with a faint smell of pine and dry grass. I'd gone hiking earlier and decided to stick around until dark, hoping to catch some shots of the stars or weird light reflections off the peaks. I had my camera with me, nothing fancy, just a decent DSLR and tripod. Around 9, while fiddling with my camera settings near a small clearing, I noticed something strange. A cluster of lights far off on the ridge moved in a pattern I couldn't immediately figure out. They weren't blinking like airplanes, and they definitely weren't the kind of steady light you get from a tower or campfire. The lights moved in a smooth, slow sequence, almost like a pulse or wave. I started recording, thinking maybe it was some kind of drone formation or weird signal reflection. The pattern didn't seem random. It was too deliberate. I kept filming for a while, trying to zoom in, but the distance made it hard to see any details beyond the lights themselves. After maybe 10 minutes, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around quickly, expecting maybe another hiker, but 2 men were standing there. Both were dressed in black suits, the kind you'd expect from security or government officials, but this was way out in the woods, miles from any road or building. Neither said anything at first, just stood watching me. One finally spoke in a calm voice. "Can we see your footage?" I hesitated but handed over the camera. They crouched down to look at the screen. The other man pulled out a phone and took a video of the footage, like they were copying or cataloguing it. I asked who they were, what they wanted, but he didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, "You should move on." Before I could ask what he meant, he stood up and walked inside the station. When I looked back, the chair he'd been sitting in was empty. I blinked and then checked around the building, but there was no sign of him. The footsteps, the man in black, I didn't feel threatened exactly, but there was definitely something off, something I can't explain. I left the mountains that day feeling watched, like the woods themselves were warning me to go. Since then, I haven't been back here, and if I ever do, I'll probably check in first. I've spent countless nights wondering about what happened that day. The memory haunts me, as clear as the moment it occurred. Standing there, camera in hand, I watched as the men exchanged knowing glances and simply walked away into the trees, vanishing like shadows. One of them had looked directly at me and delivered a chilling message. "This is not your story to tell." When I tried to review the footage later, something was wrong. The video files were completely corrupted. They would open briefly, then freeze or dissolve into static. I used every recovery tool I could find, but nothing worked. The footage was gone, completely erased. My friends don't believe me when I try to explain. Without evidence, my story sounds like a wild fabrication or a hallucination, but I know what I experienced was real. Those strange lights, the men in black, their calm yet unsettling warning. Since that day, I've avoided the mountains at night. Whenever I look up at the sky near that ridge, I can't help but wonder if those lights will return. Deep down, I'm certain I'm not meant to understand what truly happened. My next memory is jarring and disorienting. I woke up in my car, parked awkwardly on the shoulder of a 2-lane highway somewhere in northern Oregon. Highway traffic hummed around me, but everything felt dreamlike and fuzzy. Sunlight cut through the windshield and my head throbbed like I'd been struck. I couldn't remember how I'd gotten here. The last clear memory was grabbing coffee at a gas station about an hour earlier. After that, a complete blank. My phone was cracked and unresponsive. When I tried the ignition, the car started immediately. Just as I prepared to pull back onto the road, a black sedan appeared behind me. This wasn't an old vehicle, but a pristine, showroom fresh car with windows tinted so dark they were completely opaque. It pulled up, effectively blocking my path. The driver's window rolled down. A man in a black suit leaned out, late 30s or early 40s, clean-shaven, with perfectly combed dark hair. His expression was unreadable, his demeanor calm and controlled. "Not yet," he said softly, his voice smooth and measured. "Excuse me," I stammered, my throat dry. "You shouldn't be driving right now," applied stretch of highway. No other cars around. Something felt off beyond my headache, like I was stuck in a weird pause. I tried to sound firmer than I felt when I said, "I need to get going." He didn't smile or soften his tone, but there was something about the way he spoke that made me hesitate. He shook his head. "Sit tight. Someone will come for you soon." Before I could ask what he meant, another man stepped out of the sedan. Same style, black suit, dark hair, serious face. He walked up to my car and looked in. Without thinking, I locked the doors. My heart was hammering there. First guy looked at me and said, "You saw something you shouldn't have. That's why you're here." I opened my mouth to argue, but I had no answers. What had I seen? I racked my brain, but only a strange memory gap surfaced. "Look," I said. "I don't know what you think I saw. I don't even remember half of today. That will change. Will help you remember. Just relax." I wanted to slam the gas and escape, but my body wouldn't cooperate. A pressure filled my chest as if the air had thickened. These guys in black didn't move or threaten me, yet their presence felt heavy, like a weight pressing down. The first man pulled out a small notebook. and started writing. After a few seconds, he showed me a page. "Where were you around 10 p.m. last night?" I frowned and said I was at home. He nodded slowly, then looked at his partner. "And yet, you were seen somewhere you didn't belong. What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice shaking. The second man suddenly pulled a small silver badge from his coat. "Plain metal, no words or logos. You're going to want to cooperate," he said. For a moment, the highway seemed to stretch forever, silent except for a distant car hums. The sun grew hotter, and sweat dripped down my neck. "Why are you here?" I asked again. "What do you want from me?" The first man smiled. "Real, but just the tiniest edge of it, to make sure you stay quiet." I could feel my hands trembling. "About what?" He closed the notebook and nodded at his partner. Now, it was late October, a Thursday, and I was driving home from work through the outskirts of New Richmond, Wisconsin. The sky was mostly clear, with a cool, damp feeling hanging in the air, the kind of chill that settles in when the sun has just dipped below the horizon. A few miles past the local power plant, the large coal-fired facility everyone in town jokes about but relies on, something caught my attention. I'd traveled this stretch of road countless times before, and it was usually quiet and uneventful. But that evening, just after 7 p.m., I spotted some unusual lights hovering over the power plant. These weren't the standard work lights or tower warning beacons. They were smaller, brighter, and arranged in a pattern that defied normal equipment logic. Moving slowly but with clear purpose, they seemed to be surveying or scanning the facility. Curiosity mixed with caution, I pulled over to the side of the road. I kept my headlights off and cracked the window slightly to listen. The air carried a faint ozone and burning coal smell, but beneath that was a sharp, metallic scent I couldn't identify. The lights blinked intermittently, not like an emergency signal, but more like a coded sequence or communication. I reached for my phone to take a picture, but the screen started glitching, flickering on and off. After that, I left it off. Just sitting there, I watched the strange scene unfolding. Then the black sedan appeared. One guy got out and approached me, while another stayed in the car, watching intently. "You'll remember soon enough," he said. The sedan slowly backed up before speeding off, leaving me alone on the shoulder. The quiet returned, but the air felt different, heavier, with something unseen lingering. I sat there for a long time before starting the car again. The drive home was silent, with frequent glances in the rearview mirror, half expecting the black sedan to reappear. At home, I checked the clock. 3 p.m. This meant there was a huge chunk of last night I couldn't remember. Somehow connected to these men in black, I never called the cops. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't even try to explain it because no explanation made sense. All I knew was that I'd been watched, maybe controlled, and whatever had happened wasn't over. The strangest part? After that day, I'd occasionally catch a flash of a black car just out of sight. Always when I was alone, always for just a second, and I don't think they're done with me yet. The lights shifted slowly along the perimeter of the plant before vanishing behind one of the cooling towers. A car pulled up behind me, its presence noticeable through the rearview mirror. No headlights, just a dark shape with a quiet engine. The driver's window rolled down, revealing a clean-shaven man in his mid-40s. His slick black hair and dark suit seemed out of place in this area. No badge, no identification, just a stiff, professional smile. "Evening," he said in a measured, emotionless tone. "Do you work at the power plant?" he asked. I responded that I was just passing through, working downtown on Main Street. He nodded, as if my explanation made perfect sense. Moments later, another car pulled up. A second man stepped out, dressed similarly, black suit, pale skin, looking like he hadn't seen sunlight in ages. The first man leaned closer to my window. "What time exactly did you see the lights?" "Around 7:10, I explained, heading home from work. They were hovering over the northern cooling towers for maybe 5 minutes before moving behind the towers and disappearing." The second man stepped forward, hands folded calmly. "Did you see any people? Workers? Maintenance crews?" "No. It was quiet. I hadn't seen anyone except those lights." A tense silence followed as they seemed to process my words. Then came the unexpected request. "Do you mind if we take a look at your phone?" I declined, which seemed to heighten the tension. "I don't know what those lights were, but it wasn't normal," I admitted. The second man nodded slowly. "We understand." It's important that no one else talks about this. The company is already aware and handling it. The company? They clarified it was the power plant's management requesting discretion. The first man then pulled out a small badge. Not police, more like a government ID, though the details were blurry in the dim light. "Thank you for your cooperation," he said flatly, "and your discretion." Both men returned to their cars, vehicles with no visible license plates, and quietly disappeared, leaving me with more questions than answers. I was out on the trail by myself that weekend hiking in the northern Adirondacks. It was late September, and the weather had turned cool but clear, perfect for hiking. The leaves were just starting to change, and the air had that crisp smell of pine and wet earth. I'd planned a 2-day trip camping near a little abandoned cabin I'd heard about from local hikers. It wasn't on any official maps, but I found it marked in an old guidebook I picked up in a dusty outdoor shop in Saranac Lake. As I got closer to the power plant that night, something felt off. The road was quiet after 2 cars drove off. The second car pulled ahead and disappeared first, with the first car following. I sat there a minute longer, trying to shake off the creeping feeling that I'd just been watched in a way I didn't want to be. When I finally got back on the road, the power plant was dark again, just the usual orange glow from the towers. No lights, I told my boyfriend Mark about what I saw. He was skeptical, naturally. Maybe some government agents or company security, he said. Probably just making sure I don't spread rumors, but I wasn't so sure. Over the next few days, I kept catching weird things. My phone acted up, cutting out calls and messages without explanation. Once, while driving past the plant in daylight, I saw a black SUV parked near the gate. The windows were tinted so dark it looked like a black hole. No one got out, and the driver's seat was empty. A few nights later, I thought I heard footsteps outside my apartment window around 2 a.m. When I looked. There was no one there, but the street light flickered strangely, and the air smelled metallic again. I started avoiding that stretch of road after work, taking a longer route, even though it added 20 minutes to my commute. I didn't want to see those lights again or the men in black. Weeks went by with nothing unusual until one evening when I was working late at the office. It was nearly 10 p.m. and the building was empty except for me. I glanced out the window and thought I saw a dark figure standing across the street in the shadows of a street lamp. But when I looked again, nothing was there. I keep thinking about those lights, the men, and that badge I never got a proper look at. It all feels like part of something bigger I'm not supposed to know about. But I also know I'm probably just an ordinary person who stumbled onto something strange one night, and that maybe it's better left alone. I still drive past the plant sometimes, but I don't stop, and I never mention what I saw to anyone else. No, late afternoon around 3 p.m. I arrived at a cabin that matched the description perfectly, small, weathered with broken windows and a sagging porch. Nobody seemed to have been here for years. Setting up camp a little way off near a cluster of fir trees, I settled in to explore the surrounding area. The silence was complete except for the usual forest sounds, bird calls and wind rustling through branches. As evening approached and the sun dipped low, I decided to walk back toward the cabin. It was around 7 p.m., and twilight was painting the sky a deep blue. Suddenly I saw something extraordinary, a glowing orb hovering about 30 yards from the cabin just above the ground. It was round and pure white, but not harsh, more like a soft internal light that glowed gently. The orb remained still, floating about 2 feet off the ground. I froze. At first I thought it might be a lantern or abandoned campfire, but there was no smoke, no heat, no sound. The light was too steady and clean. The forest had fallen into an unusual quiet that felt different, as if everything had suddenly hushed. For about 5 minutes, I watched the orb. Then it began moving slowly toward the cabin, gliding just above the ground, steady and silent. When it reached the porch, it hovered near the broken window for a moment before vanishing instantly. Just like that, gone. That night, sleep was difficult. I kept thinking about the orb and could swear I heard a faint humming noise occasionally. It wasn't loud, just a soft vibrating sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Early the next morning, I packed up and headed down the trail. About halfway back to my car at the trailhead, I encountered a strange man standing near the forest's edge. He wore a black suit, the kind you'd expect at a funeral or formal business meeting, which seemed wildly out of place in the wilderness. His dark hair was slicked back, and his expression was flat but intensely focused. When he called out, "Hey," I stopped. After a brief cryptic exchange, he told me the things I'd seen weren't real and that I should leave before nightfall and never return. His manner was both warning and statement, leaving me confused and slightly annoyed. Nom, here's the rewritten version. Late November nights at the old radio tower on Millbrook's Edge were usually quiet. The small upstate New York town faded into darkness as I worked my shift, managing emergency broadcasts for Near-Go-Zebra. My workspace was a cramped room atop a rusty metal structure, with fog rolling in from the river just a mile away. That night began like any other. I arrived around 9 p.m., climbed the spiral staircase, and settled in for my usual routine. Condensation streaked the windows, and the silence was almost complete, except for the soft equipment, hum and occasional transmitter beeps. Around midnight, something changed. The radio started crackling with static. At first, nothing unusual. But then the interference grew louder, different. It wasn't a standard signal or weather interference. This static felt intentional, like something was trying to push through. As I tried adjusting the dials, the white noise persisted, a low, drawn-out hiss that didn't belong. It felt almost alive, with a presence that made me uneasy. Days later, I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder. Sometimes, in the quiet woods, I'd catch a faint light flickering beyond the trees. I never returned to that trail and rarely spoke about what happened. Earlier, during an encounter that still haunts me, a stranger had appeared. He smiled, but it was a cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You shouldn't be here," he'd said in a low, steady voice that made arguments feel pointless. When I explained I was just hiking, he simply nodded and thanked me for my discretion before disappearing into the forest shadows. The whole experience didn't make sense, yet somehow it did, and I'm still trying to understand what occurred that night. No, here's the rewritten text. Silence filled the control room as I pulled back from the microphone, hoping to hear something clearer without my own voice interrupting. Outside the window, barely visible through the thick fog, a strange figure stood on the metal catwalk surrounding the tower. This wasn't someone you'd expect to see in these conditions. While most workers wore practical clothing, this man was dressed in a crisp black suit and tie, his hair perfectly slicked back. His skin was unnaturally pale, almost luminescent in the dim light. Something about his posture was different. He stood completely still like a statue, with one hand raised in a clear gesture telling me to stop. For a moment, I thought I might be imagining things. The fog was dense, the room dark, static buzzing in every corner. But when I looked again, he remained unmoving, watching me intently. His eyes seemed fixed on me, though I couldn't make out their color against the faint glow of the control panel. My first instinct was to reach for the radio, to call out. But suddenly the static surged, cutting through my potential transmission with a harsh, overwhelming hiss. It was more than interference. It felt like a warning. My heart racing, I grabbed my jacket and watched as the man abruptly turned and stepped off the catwalk, disappearing into the mist. I sat frozen, listening to the lingering static and the tower's machinery. When the morning shift arrived, I described what happened, but no one believed me. They dismissed it as fatigue or fog-induced hallucination. But this was just the beginning. Over the next few days, strange things started happening. My phone became unpredictable. Calls wouldn't connect, texts would send blank, and the screen would occasionally flicker with static even when powered off. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, feeling watched whenever I was outside or driving home in the darkness. One night in the parking lot behind the tower, I noticed a black sedan parked at the edge, where the lot met the woods. It was out of place, too pristine and polished for this area. Something about it felt wrong, deliberate. The car seemed to be waiting, though, for what, I couldn't say. No, I was parked at a truck stop just off Interstate 40 in New Mexico, somewhere between Albuquerque and Gallup. Early morning, around 4:30 a.m., the kind of time when the sky is just starting to get light, but everything still feels wrapped in quiet. I'd pulled over to grab a coffee and maybe rest for a bit before hitting the road again. The parking lot was mostly empty, except for a few trucks scattered around and the convenience store still closed. I stepped out of my rig and stretched, glancing up at the sky. It was clear, maybe a little colder than usual for that time of year. The stars were still out, but I noticed something Odd almost right away. There was this low, fast-moving light slicing across the horizon, moving way too quick for any plane I'd seen. I'm used to watching the sky a lot on these drives, and I've seen planes, helicopters, satellites, all kinds of stuff. But this didn't fit any of that. It was traveling maybe a few 100 feet off the ground and fast, much faster than any small plane. It didn't make any noise either. No engine hum, nothing. It just moved in a way that didn't make sense. The pickup trucks and older sedans most folks drove caught my attention. I thought about ignoring it, but then I saw two men step out, both wearing dark suits similar to the man on the tower. They moved calmly, almost like they were on a mission, but not in a hurry. One of them looked directly at me as I approached and gave a small nod. I stopped, feeling a cold knot in my stomach. "You need to be careful what you say," one of them said, voice low and serious. "Some things are better left alone." Before I could answer, they got back into the car and drove off, leaving me standing there in the cold fog swirling around my feet. After that, the static got worse. My broadcasts would cut in and out, and sometimes, just when I was about to sign off, I thought I heard faint whispers through the radio. Nothing I could make out clearly, but it was enough to make me pause. I kept thinking about that man outside the window, the way he moved and the warning. I never saw him or the two men again, but their presence lingered. Every time I climbed up that tower, I felt like I was being watched, like the fog itself was waiting for something. Eventually, the static faded and the broadcasts returned to normal, but the feeling didn't go away. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind is just right and the fog rolls in thick, I swear I can hear that same hiss creeping back through the radio, soft and steady, like a warning from somewhere just beyond the trees. Here's the text reorganized. Something weird happened that night. I spotted a light moving sleek and fast, a straight line cutting across the sky before vanishing behind a western ridge. At first I thought I might be tired or seeing things, but then it happened again, a quick blink, like a reflection or signal, and then nothing. No trail, no sound. I stood there staring at the spot where it disappeared. The movement felt off, unnatural. Climbing back into my truck, I couldn't shake the memory and decided to grab some coffee. The store was just opening around 5 a.m., daylight already creeping in. That's when I noticed him, an unusual figure sitting in the back. A man in a black suit, which wasn't typical truck stop attire, no hat, no boots, just a crisp buttoned suit and white shirt. His polished shoes and neat hair made him stand out. Older, maybe late 50s, clean-shaven, with something about his posture that made me uneasy. I ordered coffee and tried to ignore him, but suddenly he was right beside me. "Quite a night for watching the skies," he said, his calm voice carrying a controlled tone that made me sit up straighter. I described what I'd seen: low, fast, silent, unlike any plane. He nodded, as if he already knew. "Not many people notice," he said. "Most assume it's a light trick or military tech, but sometimes it's something else." Leaning in, he spoke like sharing a secret. "Sometimes it's better not to tell anyone." When I asked why, he explained carefully. "Not everything people see is meant to be explained. Not every sighting leads anywhere good." His smile wasn't friendly when I pressed for more information. "I'm here to help people understand when to speak up and when to stay quiet," he said. Before I could ask more, he pulled out a business card, blank except for a phone number and the name Mr. Gray. "Call if you have questions," he said, then glanced toward the door. I was out hiking alone in the San Gabriel Mountains, just north of Los Angeles, late one spring afternoon. The day was warm yet crisp, with mostly clear skies and a few wispy clouds near the horizon. I'd started around 3 p.m., planning to explore a trail between Eaton Canyon and Mount Wilson before sunset. Nothing fancy, just a solo day to clear my head. The hike was peaceful, with only a handful of people on the trail, most turning back early. I went deeper past the main junction, heading toward a ridge that offered a good view of the valley below. Around 5:30, I stopped at a clearing, took a drink of water, and noticed something strange just to the east. At first, I thought it was a helicopter hovering in the distance, but it wasn't moving like any helicopter I'd ever seen. A smooth, metallic, oval-shaped object hung silently, maybe a few 100 feet above the treetops, just over the ridge. No visible wings or rotors. The low sun caught it in a weird way, making it shimmer like metal brushed with oil or mercury. I fumbled for my phone and snapped a couple of pictures, zooming in as best I could. Then it vanished. No whoosh, no noise. Just blinked out like someone turning off a lamp. I scanned the ridge where it had been, but found nothing. No aircraft, no drone. I was frozen, a mix of excitement and disbelief washing over me. Looking around, I realized I was completely alone. After hiking back down, my mind racing, I told a friend from the road about what I'd seen. He laughed it off, suggesting it was probably just a drone or military plane testing, but I knew what I saw wasn't normal. Later, a guy in a suit showed up at a random truck stop, warning me to keep quiet. He turned and walked out like he didn't want to stick around. I watched him go, a knot form in my stomach. The whole thing didn't make sense. I haven't called the number he gave me. I don't think I want to know more. Sometimes, as that guy said, it's better not to tell anyone. But the image of that silent, fast light still lingers whenever I'm driving through those empty stretches of desert sky. My legs were moving automatically as I headed back to the railhead parking lot around 6:45, just as the sun was starting to set. 2 men were standing near my car, looking completely out of place. They wore black suits with white dress shirts and black ties, their hair meticulously styled as if they just stepped out of a fashion magazine. One was tall and thin with sharp features, while the other was shorter and stockier, wearing dark sunglasses despite the low evening light. Neither introduced themselves. Instead, the taller man went straight to the point. "Did you take any photos today?" I hesitated, glancing at my phone on the passenger seat. "Yeah," I admitted. "I got a couple of pictures of something weird near the ridge." His eyes narrowed slightly, though his expression remained unchanged. "We need you to delete those photos for everyone's safety," he stated firmly. Confused, I asked, "Why? What's going on?" The shorter man cut in bluntly, "No reason for you to know. It's best if you forget what you saw and don't share anything." My stomach tightened. "I don't think I can just do that," I responded. They exchanged a quick look before the taller man leaned in, speaking softly but with unmistakable authority. "We're not asking. We're telling you to delete the photos and not talk about this." I felt like I was in a bizarre movie scenario. Stepping back, I said, "I'm not comfortable with that. Is this some kind of joke?" They didn't laugh. The shorter man reached into his jacket and pulled out a small black device. I couldn't quite make out. "We don't want to escalate this," he warned. "You cooperate, and nothing happens." I raised my hands to, "I'm just a hiker." After a moment's intense staring, the taller man nodded to his companion. They turned and walked to a dark sedan nearby, started the engine, and pulled away slowly before speeding down the road. I stood there long after they'd gone, my heart racing and hands shaking. Opening my phone, I looked again at the photos, just blurry shots of a metallic shape against the sky, but they were real. Part of me wanted to delete everything, yet another part refused to forget. I felt I'd accidentally witnessed something I was never meant to see. That night, sleep was impossible. The weather was clear but crisp, the kind of cold that makes your breath visible if you stop moving. I hadn't planned to be here long, just wanted to unwind after work and maybe get some shots of the stars. I parked on the gravel road leading down to a small public fishing spot. It's a quiet place. Not a lot of people come around that late, especially on a weekday. The lake's surface was mostly still, reflecting the stars perfectly. I grabbed my phone and camera, figuring I'd try to catch some long exposure shots of the water and sky. About an hour in, I noticed some faint lights flickering just above the tree line on the far side of the lake. They weren't like plane lights, too scattered and irregular to be aircraft. At first, I thought it might be a campfire, but the colors kept shifting. Red, green, pale blue, almost like those LED party lights, but without any pattern. I started recording video on my phone, zooming in to get a better look. The lights moved slowly, like they were floating just above the trees, but the way they moved didn't make sense. The thing felt like a half-remembered dream, but the photos were on my phone and the memory was sharp. I checked the news for anything about unusual sightings. Nothing. No missing persons, no accidents, no government statements. The next day I drove back up to the trailhead, hoping to find something. Maybe another sign, a clue. The parking lot was empty, except for my car. No black suits, no sedan. I hiked a little ways up the trail, but the ridge was quiet, normal. No lights, no metallic shapes. I told a few close friends about the encounter with the men, but not the object. No one really believed me, and I didn't push it. I didn't want the photos online or anywhere else. Weeks later, sometimes when I'm alone, I think about those two men, how calmly and quietly they told me to delete the photos for everyone's safety. It's strange how normal their presence was. How confident, like they were used to it, used to people seeing things they shouldn't. I never saw them again. The photos stayed on my phone for a while, but eventually I did delete them. Not because I wanted to, but because I felt it was safer that way. Still, every now and then when I'm out hiking or just looking up at the sky, I wonder if they're watching, making sure I'm keeping quiet, or if the thing I saw is still out here hiding just beyond the ridge, waiting for the next person to notice. Restructured paragraph flow. The forest was unusually silent when I returned from the lake. No night birds, no distant highway sounds. Just the crunch of my boots on pine needles. Earlier, I'd been filming something bizarre near the water. Lights that blinked and shifted, moving in a pattern too deliberate to be a random drone or boat show. Back at the parking lot, two men in black suits and dark sunglasses were waiting by my truck. They looked like they'd been expecting me. The taller one with thinning hair spoke first, his voice calm but firm. "Are you the one who took the videos near the lake?" I confirmed I was, wondering how they knew. My phone had been acting strange ever since I left the water. Glitching, flickering, apps crashing unexpectedly. The video itself was grainy but showed these unusual lights, uneven and shifting colors moving in an odd way. The second man, with a squared jaw and impassive expression, stepped forward. "There's a technical issue. We need to take your device and make some checks." When I hesitated and asked why, the first man explained that something on the device could potentially cause problems if left unchecked. "We're not asking," the tall man said, his gaze steady. "Just give us the phone." My heart raced, but I tried to remain calm. I didn't feel comfortable handing it over, but their presence suggested this wasn't really a request. And two strangers dressed unusually approached me, demanding my phone after I recorded something odd. My instincts told me something wasn't right. They seemed out of place, and when I refused to hand over my device, the man with a square jaw opened a small black case with electronic gadgets I didn't recognize. "I'm sorry," I said, backing away toward my truck. "I have to get going." The taller man's voice grew serious. "You don't understand. Sometimes things like this don't end well if mishandled." I ignored his warning and drove off, watching them stand motionless in my rearview mirror. During the drive home, my phone started acting strange. The screen flickered and then went completely black. I tried turning it on multiple times, but nothing worked. When I got home that night, I plugged it in, hoping for a charge, but the phone remained unresponsive. What was more peculiar, other electronics in the house began acting up too. The Wi-Fi router dropped signal, and lights dimmed briefly. Nothing major, but definitely odd. The next day, an unknown number called. Despite my hesitation, I answered. A clipped voice said, "Mr. Harper, we're calling regarding your device." Then silence. "You'll be contacted soon. Please cooperate." The line went dead. After that call, the glitches stopped. My phone powered on, but all the video files I had recorded that night were gone. Even older files had been wiped clean. The men in black never contacted me again. We were driving through northern Vermont in late April, on one of those road stretches cutting through dense forest with barely anything else around. My wife Jess was driving, and I was lost in thought about what had happened. The whole incident still haunts me. Why those strange lights? Why were they so interested in a simple video from a quiet lake? It feels like something between reality and a bad dream that I can't shake. But I know what I saw. We'd been driving for hours, slowly making our way out of the city toward a rented cabin near Lake Champlain. The sky was a deep blue bordering on black, with just enough fading light to keep the horizon visible. Cold, damp air from an earlier rain left the road slick, and a low fog started creeping along the edges of the trees. Our trip was meant to be simple and relaxing, just us, the woods, and maybe some hiking. The quiet was comfortable, punctuated only by the rhythmic hum of tires on wet asphalt. About 20 minutes before our turn-off, we passed a small rest area on the right side. Just a gravel patch with a few picnic tables and trash bins. I wasn't planning to stop, but a dark sedan caught my eye. It was parked oddly under a flickering orange lamppost, facing toward the forest at an unusual angle. "Hey, look at that car!" I told Jess. "Doesn't seem right." She glanced over. "Yeah, that's weird. Should we pull in? Maybe someone needs help." As we slowed down, The driver's door opened. A man stepped out, mid-50s, wearing a crisp dark suit, black tie, white shirt, with neatly slicked back hair. His pale complexion revealed nothing. No anger, no friendliness, just a serious demeanor. He didn't wave or call out, just stood in the dim light, staring directly at us. Jess brought the car to almost a complete stop. "You okay?" she asked softly. The man remained silent for a moment before taking a slow step toward the road, his eyes locked onto ours. "Turn back," he said, his voice low and steady, like stating an undeniable fact. "Turn back before it's too late." The words caught me off guard. I blinked, expecting some kind of explanation. Jess looked confused, glancing between me and the strange man. "What do you mean?" I asked, but he didn't answer. Instead, he took a step back toward the shadows. And then, impossibly, he seemed to fade into the darkness. Not by running or walking away, but as if the light around him simply dimmed, blending his figure into the night until he was completely gone. Driving back from our trip, something felt off. We'd encountered something strange, something that didn't quite make sense. It started when a mysterious man seemingly vanished into thin air right in front of us. Jess locked the car doors, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Did he just disappear?" she whispered. The rest of the drive was tense. We kept scanning the road and mirrors, half expecting to see the black sedan or the man's face watching from the woods. When we reached the cabin, the forest sounds felt different, thicker, more watchful. Wind rustling through pines and birds settling for the night seemed to carry an unusual weight. That night, sleep eluded me. I thought about the man and his cryptic warning. My phone was dead, despite being charged before we left. The next morning, I returned to the rest area, hoping to find some trace of evidence. The gravel spot was empty, with only tire tracks leading toward the forest. I took photos, though the fog was thick and morning light weak. Strange occurrences began to accumulate. Jess mentioned a dream about walking down a road, hearing a voice telling her to stop, but no one was there. The feeling lingered with her all day. Over the next 2 days, odd incidents continued. My phone flickered with static and died randomly. Jess's watch stopped working, fully charged. The cabin's power flickered despite clear weather. We decided to leave a day early. Now, looking back, the entire experience feels like a half-remembered dream or a trick of light, but certain details remain vivid. The device glitches, Jess's dream, that warning voice urging us to turn back. I'm still unsure what we encountered or what it wanted, but something about that forest fundamentally changed how I perceive unexplained moments. I apologize, but it seems like the original text you intended to share is missing or incomplete. Could you please provide the full text you would like me to rewrite?